Erik Menendez.
I'll remind you, you're still under oath. And are you ready to proceed?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I just wanted to put those up first of all. Mr. Menendez, when we broke yesterday, we were talking about your mother's interactions with you over homework and schoolwork and learning. Do you remember that?
Yes.
You mentioned at some point when you were talking about that, something about a closet.
Yes.
Would you tell us what significance a closet had with respect to your mother and to schoolwork?
That's where I did a lot of my schoolwork when I didn't do it well.
What's where you did it?
In her closet.
Where was the closet?
In her room. It was a long, very narrow, long closet. She kept a lot of her clothes.
And is that because you liked to do schoolwork in her closet? You chose that as a place to do it?
No, she put me there when she felt that I wasn't concentrating hard enough or was having trouble concentrating or just wasn't doing it well enough to the how she liked, or when she left the house and she felt I wasn't sick. She wanted to make sure I did my work.
You say when she left the house and she felt you weren't sick. What type of days or what time of day would that relate to?
That related to during the day, late morning, afternoon, when she had left the house.
Is this?
Can you specify what time frame you're talking about?
Yes. What age or ages are we talking about when your mother would have you do work in the closet?
When I was 12, 13, 14.
Now, the days when she'd leave the house and have you be in the closet, were these weekends or school days?
The school days when she would leave the house, it's when I was homesick, but she didn't feel I was that sick.
And what was the purpose of you being, if you know, of you having to be in the closet on these school days when she was out of the house?
She wanted to make sure I didn't watch TV or do anything that I wasn't supposed to do, and made sure that I did my work.
So you were supposed to do homework in the closet?
Homework or different tests that she would give me or assignments that she would give me.
And was there a chair and a table or a desk in the closet?
No. Sometimes she'd give me a clipboard.
A clipboard?
So that I could write on.
And for how long a period of time would you have to remain in the closet after she had put you there?
Until she let me out.
And how long would that sometimes be?
Sometimes it would be an hour. Sometimes it would be all day when she left, 7 hours. Sometimes I fell asleep in there overnight.
And when, apart from the days when she wasn't there and she put you in the closet, where would she be on other occasions when she put you in the closet to do your schoolwork? Where would your mother be?
Usually across the way on her bed.
In the same room?
Yeah, the closet was at the very back, past the bathroom, past my dad's closet, down this teeny little hallway in her room. And her bedroom would be on the other side of the room.
So she'd be in her bedroom?
I mean, I couldn't tell where she was always, but when I called out, she was usually on her bed.
And did this closet have a solid door or a door you could look through?
I could peek through the bottom under the door, but it was a solid door.
And what would happen, Mr. Menendez, if while you were in the closet and your mother was home, you had to go to the bathroom?
I wasn't supposed to go to the bathroom unless I called out and asked her if she wasn't home.
I'm talking about when she is home. Okay. Let's say she's there. Okay. She's in her bedroom.
Yes.
And you have to go to the bathroom.
Yes.
What would you do?
I'd have to call out and tell her that I needed to go to the bathroom.
And would she then come, let you out of the closet, and let you go to the bathroom?
Depended.
Depended on what?
On whether she felt like letting me go to the bathroom at that time. She'd ask me what number I had to go, and if I had to go number 2, usually she'd let me out.
And if you had, and number 1 was urinating?
Yes.
And if you had to do that, would she let you out?
Sometimes she would say, I'll let you out in a few minutes or later, or whatever.
Did she ever provide you with a receptacle of some kind that you were supposed to use in the closet?
Yes, that's after I had complained that I couldn't.
You have to back off the mic. Try to sit back. Just sit back in the chair. Okay, try to stay there. Okay, go on. The receptacle in the closet.
It was a plastic bin with a yellow cover. It was a see-through type of thing.
And what was it for?
It was for when I used to go to the bathroom.
That's after you had complained?
Well, I'd complained when she left the house, she'd put me in the closet, and I didn't know I couldn't leave the closet to go to the bathroom. And she got very angry at me one time when I left the closet. And I said I used the excuse that I needed to go to the bathroom that time, even though I didn't. And so she gave me a bin to go in.
If she wasn't at home, how did she know that you left the closet to go to the bathroom, whether you really went to the bathroom or it was just an excuse? How did she know you left the closet?
She used to put this little piece of paper.
Go ahead.
She used to put this little, the microphone is too low. That's why I can't.
Excuse me, Monica, Deputy Wolf, could we find a place where it won't
No, it's just the volume.
be too close to it?
You don't have to lean that close to it. Just speak up in a loud voice.
She used to put this little piece of paper at the corner of the closet door. So if the closet door opened from the outside, the paper would fall down.
If it opened from the outside?
If it opened, the paper would fall down on the outside.
Okay. And so there was an occasion when you had left the closet and she found out?
Yeah, I didn't know this until after I found out on the second time what it was. I had left the closet and I watched TV and I got something to eat and I used the restroom and I came back and she accused me of leaving the closet and I said, no, I didn't. And she grabbed me and she started shaking me and she said, don't lie to me, don't lie to me. And I didn't know how she knew, but I admitted that I left the closet. And the second time is when I saw the piece of paper.
The second time you left the closet when she wasn't home? Is that what you mean?
Yes. I didn't understand how she knew that I had left the closet the first time.
Okay. Now, did you use this receptacle that she provided?
Yes.
Did you ever use anything else?
I didn't enjoy using I didn't really want to use this because I'd have to give it to her. And so I kept one of those plastic bags hid it in the closet. So when I had to go in there and I had to go to the bathroom, I could use my own and I could pretend that I never went.
Okay. Do you recall, you testified 2 days ago that you are currently aware that there was, strike that. You remember that you were tested for hearing problems when you were in the 6th grade or so, when you were about 13?
Yes.
And you remember testifying that you weren't told the results of that accurately by your mother at the time. Is that right?
No, I wasn't.
And you now know that those tests showed that you had some problems.
Yes.
What was your mother's reaction, if any, concerning your performance in the schoolwork she was doing with you at home after that testing? Did it change in any way?
Well, I started to do a lot more work. There was a lag in a period of time. There was intense training before I got into PDS for a few years. And then it lagged off a little and then it just came on again. And she got a lot more intense about the work I was doing and how much work I was doing and so on.
My question, though, has to do with that testing of your hearing. Did your mother ever refer to the testing of your hearing when she was doing the schoolwork with you?
Yes.
How did she treat you after the hearing test as compared to before? Was there any difference?
Yes.
And what was the difference?
She would just yell at me a lot more and tell me that I was too stupid to understand and just say a lot of things that I...
Did she say anything to you about the fact that you could hear okay?
Yes.
Well, tell us that, Mr. Menendez. You haven't told us that.
She would say a lot of different things. She would say that she usually said that I was just not bright enough, but she would say that I had the ability to hear and that I was just not using my brain, that I wasn't using my intellect. She would say, why can't you understand me? Why can't you hear me? She would get really frustrated.
And that was after the hearing test?
Yes.
So was she more critical or less critical after the hearing test?
She was more critical.
Now, when you started at PDS, what grade did you start in?
I started in 5th grade.
And had you already done the 5th grade?
Yes.
And where had you done it?
I had done it in Hopewell Valley.
Was Hopewell Valley a public school?
Yes.
And in your opinion, looking back, how did you do at Hopewell Valley School, the public school? I hadn't finished the question.
All right, why don't you finish your question?
Thank you. As compared to how you did in school performance at PDS?
I thought I did pretty well at Hopewell.
And did you think you did pretty well at PDS?
Yes.
So you thought you did the same?
PDS was a tougher school, so in comparison, I thought I did the same.
Were your grades better at Hopewell?
Yes.
Did you feel better about schoolwork at Hopewell? You were doing better?
Sustained.
Did you like getting good grades?
Yes, of course.
So were you happier with yourself at Hopewell or happier with yourself at PDS?
PDS was a lot tougher school, and I didn't like it so much because so much pressure was put on by mom to get the grades, because they let me in PDS on almost like a testing kind of a thing to see if I could pass. And so the public school was a lot easier and I liked it a lot better.
What did you think was the reason, if you thought there was a reason, for your mother's pressuring you and criticizing you with respect to schoolwork? It's his state of mind, Your Honor.
All right, it will be received for that purpose only.
Could you sit back? Thank you.
If I thought there were two reasons. One, I thought she was doing it basically because she was afraid of Dad. The way Dad treated Mom very early on in my life, when I didn't do well in sports or when I was not getting into PDS. I failed getting into PDS a few times, and he would treat Mom really badly. And so I thought that she was pushing me and putting me in closets and forcing me to do better because she was afraid of what Dad was going to do to her.
Okay. And was that your mindset about it all the way through your school career? Is that what you always believed?
That's what I believed until the end,
Okay.
when I thought that maybe she was just doing it because she wanted to get the grades herself. She wanted me to get the grades for herself.
What do you mean for herself?
Well, at the end, she was taking it really, really hard when I got bad grades, and she was really excited when I got good grades, to the point where she was no longer even cared whether I gave her the assignment and she would correct it. She would just do the assignment and give it me to hand it in. And I wasn't sure. I still thought it might be because of Dad, but I wasn't hearing Dad yell at her and hit her anymore when I was 14 and so on. So I thought maybe she was just doing it for her own.
So did you think it was important to her just for herself?
Yes.
Did your mother give you any instructions about whether or not you should discuss your school performance with any other people?
Yes.
And what were her instructions? It's not being offered for the truth, Your Honor. It's being offered for his state of mind about
These
secrecy.
instructions given to him,
Yes, by his mother.
overruled, will be received for the purpose of the witness's state of mind.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The instructions she used to give to me was simply that I was not to discuss my grades. She didn't even want me to discuss what grade I was in with my Aunt Terry because I had to stay back a year. She didn't want me to discuss how I was doing in my classes or what my teachers were saying or anything like that. She certainly didn't want me to discuss the fact that she was training me in school.
So how did that make you feel about what your mother thought of you as a student, or what you thought of yourself as a student?
Well, I always knew what she thought of me. I mean, I knew that she didn't think I was a very good student, and she didn't like how I did in class, and she didn't think I was very good in school.
Did you hear your mother talking to other people about your schoolwork?
Yes.
And what would she say to other people about it?
She would say that I was getting straight A's and that I was one of the brightest kids in the class and doing everything very, very well.
Did you know that wasn't true?
Of course.
You knew your mother was lying?
Yes.
Was this the only thing you heard your mother lying about when you were young, or were there other things?
No, there were a lot of other things.
And how many of those, or were there other things that related to the appearance of performance of the members of the family, particularly of yourself and your brother?
The appearance of performance, she would lie about how we did. I don't understand what you're saying.
That's what I meant. She would lie about how you did in what areas of your life.
She would say that we won this tournament, or we're playing just terrific and our coaches are raving about us, or this and that, when it wasn't true.
And would she ever mention what your teachers were saying about you?
Yes.
And would that even be teachers that you had? I mean, you heard two of your teachers testify here that you plagiarized or copied something.
No, she would always talk about how the teachers thought talk about how the teachers raved about me, how the tennis coaches raved about me, and how they thought I was this great student and had so much ability and so on.
How did that make you feel when she's lying this way right in front of you?
Well, it made me feel sort of embarrassed, but it made me feel like obviously she doesn't think that I am doing well enough.
Did it give you any kind of insight into how important these things were to her?
Well, I always knew how important image was to her, just from the way she would talk about how she would fuss over how she had to be perfect when she went out to a party, or fuss about the way she went to a party. She liked to go in limousines. She just talk about how she didn't want any fights at the party between her and dad. And I always knew image was very important to her.
I'd like to go back for a moment to the sexual activity between yourself and your father for a few points, all right? When you were about 13, was there an episode of what you call the mirror that had to do with the sexual activity between yourself and your father?
Well, it would happen a lot of times right after sex. So what do you mean?
What I mean is, did he do a drill in front of the mirror that had specifically to do with the secrecy?
Sure, yes.
Okay. And was I right? Was that when you were 13?
Yes.
Okay. Would you tell us about that particular drill?
I was sitting in front of the mirror. He used to do this every once in a while. I'd say at least once or twice. It happened more than just when I was 13. And I would sit in the chair in front of the mirror, and he would ask me if I've told anyone, and I said no. And he would say, "What's going to happen to you if you tell anyone?" And I remember the first time I said that you will hurt me, and he said wrong, and so I hit myself. And he said, "What's going to happen if you tell someone?" And I didn't answer. And he said again, he said, "What is going to happen if you tell someone?" And I said, "You'll kill me." And he said, "Right."
And that happened more than once?
Yes.
Now,
I got it right the second time, though.
Excuse me?
I would learn how to get it right, the answers.
So the second time, what was your answer?
Just that he'll kill me.
And then he said, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Also, when you were about 13, was there a nickname that you gave yourself that was related to what you've described here as rough sex?
Yes.
What was that nickname?
The Hurt Man.
And did you share that nickname with anyone?
Yes.
And who did you tell that was your nickname?
I told some of my friends. I told Diane. I told Lyle. I was the Hurt Man.
Did you have a cousin named Andy?
Yes.
Did you ever mention that nickname to Andy?
Yes. I more considered Andy one of my best friends than my cousin.
Okay. Did you explain to Lyle and all these other people why you were calling yourself Hurt Man, or did you just tell them the nickname?
I just told them it was because I got hurt a lot and I could.
And you didn't tell them how you were being hurt or who was hurting you?
Sustained. The answer's correct.
Did you tell them how you were being hurt or who was hurting you?
No.
Excuse me, Your Honor. Now, do you recall, Mr. Menendez, that you testified that on the Tuesday night before your parents were killed, you strike that, on Tuesday afternoon before your parents were killed, you started a conversation with your brother in the guest house where you brought to his attention a talk he had had with your father when you were young.
Yes.
When you were young, how did you find out, or how did you know that Lyle had had a talk with your father?
Because my father came in the room and beat me up.
And how old do you recall being when that happened?
I recall being 11.
And what, if anything, did your father say in accompanying this beating?
He came in the room and he said, he just very angrily told me that he could not believe I told Lyle, and what was I thinking, and didn't he understand that he was going to kill me if I told Lyle, and all this stuff. And then he had me up against the wall.
And was it after that that these drills in front of the mirror about what he would do to you if you told began?
Yeah, it was longer after that, though. This was just, I mean, he had told me many times, not specifically in reference to Lyle, that what he would do to me if I told. But it was unexpected because I hadn't told Lyle, and I didn't know he was going to come in the room. I wasn't prepared, and so it was a shock. I denied it, but he didn't believe me.
You denied what?
I denied telling Lyle.
To whom?
To my dad.
And who didn't believe you?
My dad.
Now, after that, did you have any conversation with Lyle about, or did Lyle ask you any questions about anything going on between yourself and your father?
Yes, Lyle would ask me a question every once in a while for a short period afterwards. He would say, is anything strange happening in your room with Dad or something like that? And I would say, no, I don't know what you're talking about.
And why did you say, no, I don't know what you're talking about?
Because I didn't want to give any indication that anything was, because I didn't want what happened with Dad to happen again.
You didn't want Lyle to tell him?
Exactly.
Objection sustained. The answer's correct.
What did you mean when you said you didn't want to have happen with Dad what happened before?
I didn't know what Lyle had told Dad, but I didn't want Lyle to say anything to Dad about anything. I just wanted Lyle to leave it alone. If he knew, I didn't know how he knew, but I just wanted him to leave it alone.
Okay. Now, you had mentioned in your testimony yesterday something about Vaseline. Was Vaseline something that figured into the sexual activity between yourself and your father?
Yes.
And what specific type of the sexual activity did Vaseline figure into?
The actual sex.
Was Vaseline ever a part of the rough sex?
Only in respect to actual sex, but hardly ever.
What about with respect to certain implements? Was it ever used for that?
Yes, it was used rarely, but not very often.
And with respect to actual sex, Mr. Menendez, I think you've already testified, that was still a component when you lived in California. Is that right?
Yes.
And when was the last episode of actual sex between yourself and your father in California?
In May 1989.
And was there some rule or directive of your father's having to do with Vaseline?
Yes.
And what was that rule or directive?
That I was supposed to leave it in my room, and I wasn't supposed to remove it from there.
And how would it get into your room?
Well, he brought it in very early in Pennington when I was 12 years old, and left it there. And I was told not to touch it again, and he did the same in California. He did the same in Princeton.
And when you were living in Beverly Hills, was there a particular place in the room where he would keep the Vaseline?
Yes.
And where was that?
On my bed, there were a lot of shelves. On one of the shelves in my bed.
You've looked at the photograph that's up on the board on the top on the right.
Yes.
Is there a jar of Vaseline on a shelf on your bed in that photograph?
Yes.
Now, you've talked about sexual activity occurring between yourself and your father in your bedrooms at various houses. Remember that testimony?
Yes.
Were there other places in the house where sexual activity between yourself and your father would occur?
Only one other place.
And where was that?
In the shower.
Your brother testified there were times when you and your brother and your father would shower together and your father would do something with the water.
Yes.
Was that an experience that you recall?
Yes.
I believe your brother testified to a shower that had doors where the regulator had a wrench on it.
Yeah, I don't remember that so well.
What house was that?
That was in the North Mill house, I think.
Do you remember things about where your father did things with the water from the Pennington house?
Yes, those I remember.
And what do you remember just generally about what he would do at the Pennington house?
At the Pennington house, it was a lighter thing. He would, when I was washing my hair and the shampoo was getting on my face, he would suddenly turn the water either all the way cold or all the way hot. So I learned how to shampoo my hair back because that's what he always did. He never got any shampoo on his forehead just in case I did that to him because it was sort of a thing that he used to do. And then he would have Lyle and I see who was the strongest person by, he wouldn't turn the water hot. He would turn it all the way cold and see who could last for 30 seconds in the water, who could last for 45 seconds and so on.
But let's back up to when you had the shampoo in your eyes, before you learned how to shampoo your hair to not get the soap in your eyes, okay? You said he would turn the water all the way hot or all the way cold.
Yes.
Did you ever get burned?
Yes.
Now, when you and your brother and your father showered together, was there any sex on those occasions?
No.
Were there other occasions when just you and your father showered together?
Yes.
And was there sex on those occasions?
Not always, but sometimes.
And what would have preceded those showers? What came before the showers, if you recall? What would you have been doing?
Sometimes he would shave me.
I was really asking what activities. Would this be on the weekends, the showers together?
Yes. Well, it would be after tennis, after sports, of course.
Okay, so it's after sports, of course?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we took, every time we finished playing on the tennis court, we always, him and I, and sometimes Lyle, depends how old he was at the time, would go and take a shower together.
Now, you mean every time, meaning on the weekends?
Yes, he really wasn't around too often during the day in the week.
During the week?
Yes.
Let's talk about during the week, during the school year, okay? Days when you'd go to school,
Yes.
okay? Would there usually be tennis practice before you went to school?
Yes.
And when there was tennis practice before you went to school, did you change and shower first, or did you just go to school after practice?
Usually we just went right to school.
So would the time when you would shower at home after tennis practice be on the weekends or at the end of the day?
Almost always on the weekends. We'd be playing tennis for all day, like 6 hours every day on the weekend. And afterwards, we would go and take a shower.
Now, you mentioned something about he shaved you. At what age are you talking about?
When I was 12.
When you were 12?
12.
And did this happen only when you were 12, or did it go on for
No,
some
it
period of
began
time?
when I was 12.
And how long did it go on?
Just for, it didn't happen in Princeton, so it ended before we moved to Princeton.
And you moved to Princeton when you were 15 and a half.
Yes.
And what part of your body did he shave? Or what hair did he shave?
My pubic hair.
Now, apart from the showers and your bedrooms, were there sexual incidents with your father in other places besides your home?
Yes.
And what kinds of places?
In hotel rooms when we were playing tennis, or I remember twice when we were on vacation.
And do you recall what ages you were on vacation when it happened?
One of them I do. One of them we were in St. Lucia, and the other one we were in. I don't remember exactly where we were.
What type of vacation?
It was skiing vacation. We were either in Vermont or we were in Colorado. Not really sure.
And you're not sure how old you were for the episode on the skiing vacation?
Yeah, I don't remember.
St. Lucia is where?
It's in the Caribbean.
Did you take all of your vacations with your parents?
Yes.
Now, you said there were also hotel rooms when you were on the road playing tennis. Would this be when your parents were traveling with you in tournaments?
Yes.
And Mr. Menendez, did such activity happen when you were traveling in the tournaments over the summer of 1989?
Yes.
And would there be a difference in the kind of sexual activity that would occur when you were traveling, depending on how you did in the tournament?
Yes. It would all depend on how I did in the tournament, whether I won or I lost.
And if you won, what was the usual sexual activity?
Well, in California, it wasn't so usual anymore for us to have nice sex, but it would only happen after I won.
Okay, so nice sex was reserved for when you won.
Yes.
That's when your father was in what kind of mood?
He was in a elated mood.
And what would happen when you lost?
One of two things.
And what are the two things?
He would either have actual sex or usually it was knees.
And was it knees that happened during the summer of 1989?
Yes.
Now, you testified that the last sexual activity with your father was in August of 1989. Where did it occur?
In my bedroom.
In Beverly Hills?
Yes.
When did it occur?
In August.
I know when.
It occurred before the talk, right after we got back from Kalamazoo.
Okay. And you got back from Kalamazoo somewhere around the 9th or 10th?
Yes.
So was it within a day or two?
Yes.
And what type was it?
It was knees.
Now, Mr. Menendez, when you moved to California, how old were you?
I was 16. No, I was 15 when I moved. I turned 16 right after.
You turned 16 in November after you moved?
Yes.
And up until that time, had you ever had a girlfriend?
No.
When you were in the 8th and 9th grade, excuse me, did you have friends at school who would talk about girls and sex?
Yes.
And did these friends have social interactions with girls?
Yes.
Did you?
No.
Why?
Because I was afraid of that.
What were you afraid of?
I was afraid of, they would talk about sex a lot, and I was just afraid of the conversation. I didn't even want to get into the conversation. I certainly didn't want to be around girls when talking about that, or even really around girls and that type of thing.
Why?
Because it made me real self-conscious, made me real afraid that they might be able to tell something that I knew a little bit too much, or that I knew something that I shouldn't have, or that they would be able to tell something I didn't know.
Tell what?
That I would be able to, something would slip out
About what?
about what was happening with my dad.
Okay. In fact, was there a time when you made choices about who your friends would be based on whether certain boys talked about sex and other boys didn't?
Yeah, there were two of my friends in school, two of my good friends in school. Not only real friends, but in school, they talked too much about sex, and I told them that I couldn't deal with the friendship anymore. I couldn't handle it.
Were these friends trying to get you to do anything?
Yes.
What were they trying to get you to do?
They were trying to get me to kiss a girl or have a girlfriend, approach a girl.
Okay. Now, when you moved to California, did your mother start to talk to you about something that she had not previously talked to you about?
Yes.
And do you recall where you were living when your mother first brought this particular topic up to you?
In the Oakwood apartments.
So that's right after you got to California?
Yes.
How long did you live in the Oakwood apartments?
Very short time. I don't even remember how long. A month or two.
You don't remember?
Not really sure. It was very short time because by November we were living in the Calabasas house.
By your birthday?
Yeah. So it couldn't have been more than 2 months.
Okay. Now, while you were living in the Oakwood apartments, did you hear arguments between your parents?
Yes.
And what did you learn from those arguments about what was going on between your parents?
That they were talking about divorce.
And did you learn what the reason was why they were talking about divorce?
Because my dad had an affair.
And what was your mother's basic mood, if you will, during the time that you lived in the Oakwood apartments?
She was very depressed, crying a lot, but very angry when talking with my dad.
She was angry with your dad?
Yeah, she was really angry. She was really angry.
Now, did they, before this time, had they ever talked about their marriage or their relationship in front of you?
No.
Now, were they doing this openly in front of you, or were you just hearing things?
It was a very small apartment, and it was only 3 rooms, and so you could hear through the walls.
But they would be in another room.
Yes. They'd be in the middle room. There was a bedroom on each side of the middle room, and they'd be in the middle room.
Is the middle room a living room?
It was like a living room, eating room kind of a thing.
And was it while you were still there that your mother brought up this topic to you?
Yes.
And what topic did she bring up?
That she wanted me to get a girlfriend.
And what did she say?
She said I had to have a girlfriend within 6 months.
Or?
She didn't really say or. She was just made it pretty clear that something bad would happen if I didn't have a girlfriend within 6 months.
And did you have any idea why she would say this to you?
I assumed it was because of her image. She wanted her son. When I was younger, people would ask me in front of her, "Oh, do you have a girlfriend?" Or they would ask her in front of me, "Does he like girls?" Yet I was young, and she said, "No, he doesn't have time for that. He doesn't have that." But when we moved to California, it was a really big thing for me to have a girlfriend, and later on I found out why. But at that point, I didn't know.
Okay. And did you, within 6 months, find a girlfriend?
I think I didn't make the 6-month deadline, but it was just after.
And what were the initials of this girlfriend, so we don't have to use her name?
KS.
And was this a girl that you went with twice over 2 different time periods?
Yes.
Now, you also said that the first 3.5 months that you were in California, there was no sexual activity whatsoever by your father.
Right.
Did you know why that was true?
No, I had no idea.
Before you left Princeton, the last couple of months you were living in the Princeton house, was your father out of town a great deal?
Yes.
Did you learn that he was in California most of that time?
Yes.
And did you understand, or did he tell you the purpose of his travels?
Well, I knew that we were planning on moving to California.
And at any time, did you learn that he was job hunting or job interviewing?
Yes.
So how would you compare, therefore, Mr. Menendez, your father's being, it's a clumsy question, let me withdraw that. You've testified that over the course of your childhood in New Jersey, your father would be in the city, in New York City during the week, or travel a lot. Is that right?
Yes.
Was he away from home more when you lived in Princeton or less than when you lived in Pennington?
He was away from home more.
Was he away also for longer periods of time?
Yes. He traveled a lot more. I mean, he traveled a lot when we lived in Pennington. But most of the time he was just in New York, and he stayed over there a few nights. But when we were in Princeton, he left the state a lot.
So do you have many memories of him at home in the Princeton house at all?
I have almost none.
Now, when the sex started up again after the 3.5 or so months in California, this was before you had met your mother's deadline for getting a girlfriend. Is that right?
I'm sorry?
Was this before you met your mother's deadline, before you got your girlfriend?
What was?
The sex in California
Yes.
starting up again.
Yeah, long before.
How did you feel about the relationship with that girlfriend, that first girlfriend?
Oh, it was like a new life for me. It was something that I had never experienced before. And suddenly I was actually happy sometimes. I felt really, I looked forward to seeing her, and I felt really warm when I was with her. And it made me really insecure at times, but it also made me feel more comfortable.
And did it have any effect on your feelings about what was going on between yourself and your father?
Yeah, it had a big effect.
And what was that?
It made me really, really despise, really hate what was happening with Dad. It made me really, really dread it, and really, really hate it.
Was there something that you were worried about more so than ever once you had a girlfriend concerning the sex?
Objection sustained.
What were your concerns now that you had a girlfriend with respect, well, strike that. Were there any new concerns that you had concerning the sex with your father now that you were seeing a girl?
No concerns about him, just concerns about her finding out about me.
Do you recall, Mr. Menendez, whether there were ever sexual incidents with your father on days when you had dates with your girlfriend?
Yes. Yes.
Was there anything notable about that?
Yes, sometimes I just refused to go out on the date. I remember one time when I was about a month after we started dating, my dad had come into my room, and I was supposed to meet her, and I called her, and I said, I was crying, and I said, I want to end the relationship. And she wouldn't let me end it because I wouldn't tell her why. But I just had a lot of confusion, a lot of problems with it.
Now, you've testified that in the very early years of the sexual relationship with your father, you actually didn't have negative feelings about it because you felt it was a closeness with him?
No, I didn't have very many negative feelings about him coming into my room and being with me. I didn't, when I was young, I didn't, I didn't like some of the things that was happening, but I thought it was just something that I'd get used to. I thought it was me when I was younger.
And so were you actively seeking or thinking of ways to end it when you were young, say under 11, or not?
No, not at all.
Now, when it got violent at 11, okay, I think you described a period when after that you were very depressed, you tried to run away, and then there was a period that you called trying to fight back, like the cinnamon and hiding and those things.
Yes.
Now, at that time, did you want it to end?
Yes.
Did you ever tell your mother in an effort to get it to end?
Definitely not.
Why didn't you tell your mother?
Because for a few reasons. One of the big reasons was if she believed me, I knew she couldn't do anything about it. She certainly couldn't get Dad to stop by fighting Dad. I just felt bad for her, and I didn't. She had a lot of problems. She was sad or angry a lot, and I didn't want to have to give her more problems.
What about any concern about your father if you had told her?
Well, that was the obvious concern. I didn't want to get beaten up. I didn't want to get killed. I didn't want anything to happen to me.
Now, did you believe that if you told your mother and she accepted it, that she would mind what your father was doing?
Yes, of course.
And did you think that if she minded, she'd try to help you?
Yeah, I thought she would try to help me, and then her and Dad would no longer get along, or Dad would do something to her real bad and would destroy the family. I didn't want all these problems.
And that was apart from whatever you thought directly might happen from your father?
Yes.
Now, did you, by the time you were, well, I don't know, you tell me, at what age did you come to believe that what was happening between you and your father was really abnormal?
Really abnormal?
Yeah, really wrong or abnormal?
Section bleeding, right?
Because already,
When I was 13 or 14, when I was younger, when I was like 12 and so on, I just really hated it. But I thought it was normal. It was only when I talked to my cousin, I just began to really have problems with it, that I thought maybe this was not something normal.
you said you talked to your cousin. Mr. Menendez, was there one person that you were closest to when you were young?
Yes,
And was that a person your age or someone younger than yourself?
that was someone younger than myself.
And who was that person?
That was my cousin Andy.
Andy what?
Andy Cano.
And whose child is he?
My aunt's.
Yes. Your aunt who?
My Aunt Martha.
Okay. Now, was there a time in your life that when you were closer in some ways to Andy than even to your own brother?
Yeah, especially when Lyle got a girlfriend.
And how old were you when Lyle got a girlfriend?
I was 13, I believe.
And at that age, when you were 13, is that when Lyle started seeing that young woman that's been talked about here, Stacy?
Stacy.
And before that, in a year or two before that, had you been spending social time with Lyle?
A lot of social time. He was my only real friend. I mean, Andy and Lyle, and then I had one guy, when Brendan, who I would see every once in a while.
Okay, but
when I
what
was
were you
allowed,
doing
but-
with Lyle?
I would go to the mall with him. He would go to the arcade a lot, and I would play soccer with him, just friendly, and roughhouse with him, and climb trees and do things.
And then he got a girlfriend?
Yes.
And how much of that activity between yourself and Lyle continued after Stacy came upon the scene?
Not much. I felt really abandoned, and
Abandoned by whom?
by Lyle. I knew he didn't do it on purpose, but I just felt like I felt like I lost my best friend, and because he would spend all the time with Stacy.
And at this time, did you therefore become closer with Andy?
Yes.
Mr. Menendez, when you were about 13, did you actually tell Andy Cano what was happening between yourself and your father?
I told him.
I'm not asking what you said, because that would be hearsay, but did you tell him what was happening?
Yeah, I believe I told him before 13.
Before you were 13?
Yeah. I think I told him when I was before Lyle started dating Stacy, when I was about 12.
Well, if he remembers that he was 10, could your memory be defective?
Possibly my memory is defective. Possibly
You're
it's
3 years
his.
older than him, aren't you?
Yeah, I think so.
And was he, how did you, strike that. How did you tell him, strike that. You've testified you were, in part, afraid to tell people. Is that right?
Yes, I was very afraid.
Why would you tell Andy if you were afraid to tell?
Well, because Andy and I were having a really close relationship, and I didn't really tell him at first. I did it real slowly, getting into it. Eventually I did, but I got real slowly first because I was afraid.
You're afraid of what?
I was afraid of telling him and him telling somebody else. So I wanted to see how he would sort of react, that sort of thing.
And did he keep the secret?
As far as I know.
You testified before that you ultimately found out or learned why it was your mother was pressuring you to have a girlfriend.
Yes.
What was it well, first of all, when did you make whatever discovery it was?
After Kirsten broke up with me.
Kirsten was the girlfriend?
Yes.
And when was it that Kirsten broke up with you?
In just after summer in September of 1987.
Was that the first time you and Kirsten broke up or the second?
That was the first time.
And did you renew your relationship with Kirsten at some point after that?
Yes.
And when did that happen?
Almost exactly a year later, in August of 1988.
And how long did your relationship with her last from August of 88?
About 6 months.
Now, when was it? You say it was September 87 when you made this discovery?
Of my mother? It wasn't like a discovery. It was just knowledge or belief of why she was pressuring me.
Okay. Well, how did you gain the knowledge or belief?
But she was real nasty after a relationship with Kirsten and I ended. And she would say, "What, are you gay? Or are you not man enough for her? Are you just not a man enough person to be with her? Is this what your problem is?" She would really get down on me.
So she gave you the impression that she questioned whether or not you were gay?
Yes.
Mr. Menendez, did you ever question in your mind whether or not you were gay?
Yes.
And why was that, if you know?
It's because I didn't understand what was happening with my father.
And what do you mean you didn't understand it?
In California, I didn't understand why it didn't hurt so much and anymore, and I didn't understand. I just felt like I was having more friends because I had a car and I was able to play tennis with them, and I was a little bit more independent, and I felt like I was supposed to be stronger, and I would still be doing this with Dad, and I wouldn't scream at him or fight back with him because I was afraid, but I still thought I should have, and I would still be able to have an orgasm.
Okay, so those things, those factors made you wonder if, in fact, maybe you were gay. Maybe that's why this is happening. Maybe that's why I don't resist. Maybe that's why it doesn't hurt. Is that what you mean?
Yes, I didn't understand.
And did Did these concerns about whether or not you were gay, did this bother you?
Yeah, it was on my mind a lot. It bothered me.
Did you think it was wrong for somebody to be gay, or was it just that you didn't know what you were?
No, I didn't think I was wrong to think I was.
No, you didn't understand my question. Do you think it was wrong for people to be gay?
No,
So what was it?
it was just that I was confused and it was difficult for me. And my mom made it seem like it was worse than death to be gay. And I didn't think I was. I didn't know. I really didn't understand.
Did you like girls?
Yes.
Were you attracted to girls?
Yes.
And eventually, did you have intimate relationships with girls?
Yes.
You said your mom made it sound like the worst thing in the world. Did your father make gay jokes?
Yes.
Did your father call you a particular name, associated a negative name for gay
Yeah, he
people?
called me a faggot.
Did he call you that a lot?
Yeah, he either called me a fag or a faggot. He used both of them. He hated gay people, and he absolutely refused to accept that what was happening between us. He just said that it wasn't any of that. He hated that.
Without naming him, was there a relative on your mother's side of the family that was perceived by the family as being gay?
He was gay.
Okay.
Well, we didn't know that. We just felt that he was.
Okay. And how did your father talk about or treat that particular individual?
He ridiculed him, made fun of him, talked a lot behind his back, would say things like, you don't want to be, I don't want to say his name, you don't want to be like this person. He would, one time I remember Lyle bought the same color and basically the same type of shoe as this person was wearing. And he made fun of Lyle for the longest time for it.
For getting the same kind of shoes as the relative?
Yeah.
Now, what did you think when your father, who is having sex with you, is taunting you with being gay?
I was real confused. I didn't think that what Dad and I was doing was a gay thing. I thought it was just what Dad and I was doing. And, but it made me real confused because it didn't hurt like I thought it should anymore. And so I didn't understand.
When your father called you faggot, did you ever answer him back in your head?
Yes.
What did you say?
I said, well, then what the hell are you?
Now, when you were 13 to 15 and the rough sex was happening, did you, based on things your father was doing, did you form some opinion about his experience in these matters?
I didn't hear the first part of the question.
Are you hearing okay right now?
Yeah.
Your Honor, perhaps we could take a break briefly.
Okay.
All right, we'll take a recess and we'll resume at 10 minutes after the hour.
Mr. Menendez, I want to take you back to Muncie, New York, when you lived there. Do you remember your earliest recollection of being frightened by one of your parents?
Which parent?
Your father.
Yes.
And what were the circumstances of this earliest memory of being frightened by your father?
I was swimming.
Do you remember where you were swimming?
I was swimming at I believe it was called Ramapo. I'm not quite sure of the name. It was a lap pool.
And what happened?
Well, when I was in Muncie, I couldn't quite swim the 25-yard pool without breathing. And he wanted me to do it straight without breathing because that way you swim faster. And I couldn't do it. So he would train me to do it without breathing.
And how would you do that?
By grabbing my hair and dunking me under the water, and then lifting me up and dunking me under the water again.
So what frightened you?
Just the fact that he dunked me under the water for 20, 30 seconds, and I didn't know what was happening. I was trying to grab his hand and trying to get his hand off my head because I was desperate for air. But he felt that I had to just be on the brink of desperately needing air, and then he would lift me up so I would train my lungs to be able to expand and expand.
Did you enjoy this experience?
Oh, it was really scary because I thought he was going to kill me, not intentionally. I just thought that I was going to drown underneath the water because I was down under there so long. And I didn't think he understood that I couldn't breathe sometimes. And he would lift me up in the air and I would be able to gasp for water. And then he'd put me
Gasp
back,
for water?
gasp for air. And then he would put me down underneath the water again. And I just didn't have enough time to get air.
Would your mother ever be around when your father was doing this kind of training?
Yeah.
Would she ever intervene?
No, my mom didn't intervene when my dad was doing things.
Over the years, were there occasions when your father was being physically violent with you?
Yes.
Did your mother ever intervene?
No.
Were there times when you were young, when your father was ridiculing or berating you, when your mother would say a word or two?
When I was young.
Would she do that?
Yes.
And would even that intervention, did that end before you were a teenager?
Objection, lead.
Sustained.
For how long would that type of intervention, how long did that type of intervention by your mother continue?
It continued when I was young, not all the time, usually at the dinner table when he didn't get on me very much, usually just Lyle, but I guess a lot of times I wanted to jump in, not when Dad was angry, but when Dad was in a good mood to sort of be a part of the conversation. And Dad would jump on top of me when I tried to.
Physically or verbally?
Verbally. And my mom would say, Jose, and he would just look at her and he would stop. That ended, I guess, before PDS, so it was before I was 11.
Now, have you seen the photographs up on the wall? There's a photograph of you there. I think someone testified you're about 18 months old hanging from a bar in a gym. It's on the top on the left.
Yes.
You remember that photograph being taken?
No.
Do you remember something similar happening later involving hanging from a bar with your father?
Yes.
And-
Well, it wasn't really hanging from a bar. He would put up a bar in the doorway, or he would put up a bar, not put up a bar, the bar on the soccer field, wherever there was a bar, he would want me to do pull-ups to get my arms stronger and so on. And just as I was getting tired, I would want to jump off because I was too tired. And when he'd grab my feet.
And what would that do?
Well, if I fell, he would grab my feet and then he would lift them. And so if I fell, I'd fall on my face. And so I would be desperately holding on to the bar.
And why did he do that? What was the purpose?
I think partly he enjoyed it. He wanted to get me to cry out and beg for him to put me down, and partly to keep me stronger so that, I don't know how, but every time just as I was about to fall, he dropped me. Sometimes I fell on both my feet and my hands, but he was able to drop me. He was able to time it really well. It amazed me because I didn't think he'd be able to. I was really afraid that he'd hold my feet up too long and he thought I was just crying wolf or something and wasn't really serious. And I was afraid that he wasn't going to drop me in time, but he always did.
When you were young and you were afraid of things, were your parents ever approving of your fear?
Oh, no. No, they hated people that were afraid.
Okay. You're the right distance from the mic now, but now you have to speak up a little bit, okay? They hated people who were afraid?
Yes.
And did they seem afraid?
My mom was sometimes afraid of my dad, especially early on in life. But otherwise, they certainly weren't afraid of other people or other things.
They never appeared afraid to you.
Objection, lead.
Sustained.
Did either of them ever appear afraid of other people or situations to you?
Definitely not, especially not my mother.
Excuse me?
Especially not my mother. She used to pride on, I guess, partly for Dad, about being how strong she could be and brave. I mean, in situations.
Well, did you ever hear or see your father being anything but fearless or brave?
Definitely. Well, no, that was not something my dad would do.
I want to turn your attention now to your mother, starting with when you were living in Muncie. Did you feel when you were a little...
Yes. What time frame are you referring to?
Well, do you know what years you lived in Muncie, Mr. Menendez?
Yes.
What years?
Between 3 and 7.
Okay. So that would have, well, other witnesses have testified you moved to Muncie before you were 2 years old. Do you remember being 2 years old?
No, my earliest memory is 3.
Okay. Do you remember talking to Detective Zoller on September 17th, 1989, and telling him about what you were like when you were a little child?
Yes.
Remember that conversation?
I remember hearing it in court and reading it. I don't specifically remember the conversation.
Okay. And when you were thinking of yourself as a little child, talking to Detective Zoller, were you thinking of yourself as someone living in Muncie or living in Pennington or what?
Living in Muncie.
And how little a child were you thinking? Earliest memories?
Yes, when I was 3, 4, 5, 6.
And what was your memory of yourself at that very early age? What kind of child do you remember being?
I just remembered being a nature-oriented person. I really liked the environment. I really liked trees and animals and bushes and leaves and so on.
When you were real little, did you think of yourself as a happy child or an unhappy child?
I was happy when I was outside.
When you were little?
Yes.
Showing you this photograph, Mark 271. Do you recognize the person in it?
Yes.
Is that you at 3?
Well, it's me.
You look at the back.
Yes, it's me at 3.
Your mother's handwriting is on the back.
Yes.
And is that the way you thought of yourself as a small child?
Yeah, sometimes.
Well, that's a happy child, isn't it?
Yes.
I want to call your attention for a moment, Mr. Menendez, to these photographs that are up on the board. Just check their exhibit number. 203, 206, 207. You see these 3 photographs? Can you see them?
Yes. Yes.
And do you notice in 2 of these 3 photographs there's something on your face?
Yes, just a bruise or cut.
Do you remember that particular bruise or cut?
No.
I want to call your attention to this last photograph. Before we were in court, had you seen this photograph before?
Yes.
Had you seen this photograph even printed in articles and shown in newspapers?
Yeah, that's where I saw it.
And is there something about this photograph that you noticed when you saw it printed?
Yes.
What was it that you noticed right away?
Where my dad's hand was.
And where is your dad's hand in this photograph?
On my brother's genital area.
And you didn't have any difficulty seeing that or noticing that when you saw that photograph, did you?
No.
Did you read the articles that were written, the articles that ran that photograph?
I think I read that article. I'm not sure.
One article that ran that photograph?
Yeah, I believe it was a magazine article, and I read that one.
Did the writer ever comment on where your father's hand was?
No.
Objection. This is irrelevant.
Objection sustained. The answer stricken.
When you lived in Muncie, were there occasions that you recall you were home by yourself?
Yes.
And approximately how old were you on those occasions?
Well, you're asking me when I was in Muncie?
Yes.
I was between the ages of 3 and 7.
Okay. Do you remember specific occasions when you were home alone?
Yes.
And how did you come to be home alone?
Everyone else in the house left.
And who would be the last person to leave? Who actually left you home?
My mom and my brother would leave. I remember specifically they'd leave to go play tennis sometimes.
And do you remember an occasion, strike that, how did you feel about being home by yourself?
I hated being alone. I just hated being alone at the house. I didn't like it during the day, but at night, I definitely did not like being home alone.
Why?
It just was really frightening to me. I just would hear a lot of noises, and I would get real scared and go under my bed.
And is there a particular occasion you remember when you were too scared to stay home alone?
Objection, leader.
Overruled.
Yes, there was a few times when I just couldn't handle it.
Was there one when you went looking for someone?
Yes.
And how old were you?
I think I was 5.
And who did you go looking for?
My mom.
And was it daytime or nighttime?
It was at night.
And where had your mom gone? Did you know?
To the tennis club with Lyle.
And so what were you doing?
I was walking to the tennis club.
And how far away was the tennis club?
5 miles, 6 miles.
And
far.
what happened as you were walking to the tennis club?
On the way back, my mom found me.
Whose way back? Your way back or hers?
No, on her way back.
Was she walking or was she driving?
No, she was driving in the car. She saw me on the side of the road.
And she stopped and picked you up?
Yes.
Was there an occasion when you were living in Muncie when your brother Lyle got in the family car?
Yes.
And how old was Lyle at the time, if you can remember?
Again, he'd have to be between the ages of 6 and 10.
Okay, but you have an idea, was he closer to 6 or was he closer to 10?
I think he was around 8.
How old were you?
I was young. I was like 5.
And what happened?
He got in the car and he was playing around with the driving wheel and I guess put the gear shift on neutral and the car started going backwards
Where was the car?
in the driveway.
And so it started to move?
Yeah, it started to roll backwards.
And what did you do?
I ran in the house to get Mom and say, Lyle's in the car's rolling down the hill because it was a slanted driveway. And she said, okay, I'll be there in a minute.
What was she doing?
She was on the phone.
And was she there in a minute?
She made it just before the car ran over the mailbox. Took her a little while. I was surprised.
Well, did you ask her more than once? Did you go?
Yeah, no, I ran back out and ran back in and ran back out because the car was just gradually, it wasn't rolling down. It was just moving, picking up speed.
And what had you told your mother?
I told her that Lyle was in the car and the car was rolling down the driveway.
And were you alarmed?
Yeah, I was scared for Lyle. I wanted him to get out of the car, but he was trying to get the car back into gear because he didn't want to get in trouble.
And how did your mother appear when you told her this?
Like she was bothered. She was on the phone. I don't remember exactly.
Was there another episode later on when something happened to Lyle's foot?
Yes, this I remember.
Okay. Well, do you remember what you just told us?
Yes, but I remember Mom's reaction to this.
Okay. Well, what is this? Tell us about this incident with Lyle's foot.
Lyle was in Mom's bedroom. He was on this side of the bed, and he had stepped on a needle, and I just heard him cry out. And I was in the hallway or right next to my room, and I came in and I saw the needle sticking out of both sides of his big toe, and it it really scared me. And
How was he behaving?
oh, he was crying and screaming. And so I ran and got Mom, and she was on the phone. And this time I didn't care. I was just pulling on her arm, asking her to come because Lyle was in pain and Lyle had a needle in his foot. And she pushed me away and she said, "I'll be there in a minute."
And you told her that Lyle had a needle in his foot?
Yes.
And did she come right away?
No.
And did you have to go back again?
Yes, I was begging for her to come because Lyle wasn't moving. He had his foot right in the air, and it was really hurting him.
Did the needle get removed from Lyle's foot?
I assume.
Who removed it?
I assume it was my mother.
And do you know how long it took before she tended to him?
Yeah, it took a while. And that's what really surprised me.
It surprised you?
It surprised me that she didn't come right away. I wanted her to get off the phone.
Well, Mr. Menendez, did you have an opportunity when you were quite young to observe the relationship between your brother and your mother?
Yes.
Was it somewhat different than your relationship with your mother?
Yes.
What was it like?
She disliked him. She hated him. There was a lot of tension, and she didn't care about him.
And how did you know that?
Motion to strike.
Is this being offered for the state of mind of the defendant witness here?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, it'll be received for that limited purpose.
Okay. Now, what was it that you saw or heard that led you to conclude that your mother hated your brother?
Just what she would say to him. She would say similar things to me, but just so often to Lyle. All the time, she would blame him for things that he didn't do to Dad because she didn't want to get in trouble. She would, well, she did that to me too. But she just the way she treated Lyle, I knew that she didn't like Lyle.
On an average day, Mr. Menendez, would your mother drive you and your brother to school?
Yes.
And on an average day, did she appear in the mornings to be angry with Lyle?
Yes.
What would happen, if you can recall, if, for example, she couldn't find her purse, or she couldn't find her keys, or she couldn't find something?
She'd blame Lyle.
And to the best of your knowledge, did he have anything to do with her purse or her keys or anything like that?
No. Whenever she couldn't find anything or really was late or this, and Lyle was there, she'd always blame Lyle. She'd always say, "It's your fault. You're making me busy. You make me too frustrated. I don't have time with you around."
And how did you feel about her blaming Lyle? Did you have an opinion as to whether or not he was responsible for these things?
No, I knew he wasn't responsible, but I figured that was just my mother.
And how did you feel about this?
I felt bad for Lyle.
Was he purposely upsetting her from what you could observe?
Objection, also taken.
Again, it will be received only for the state of mind of the witness.
Thank you.
Excuse me?
Was he purposefully upsetting her on these occasions?
No, not that I saw.
Now, what was different with you and your mother?
She, when I was younger, seemed to care a lot more about me than Lyle. In fact, she told me that I was a better kid than Lyle. She would compare me to Lyle. Like, I did a lot of things for her. I like doing things for her. I would vacuum the floor, I would do the dishes, and she would say these things to me because I knew she would when I did that. And she just seemed to care more about me than Lyle.
Now, you said she said things like you were a better son than Lyle.
Yes.
What other complimentary things did your mother say to you over the course of your life, Mr. Menendez?
Just basically comparing me to Lyle.
So she favorably compared you to Lyle.
Yes.
Now, you've already testified that she would call you stupid and dummy and
Yes.
that kind of thing. Can you remember, and you've been asked this before, you've been asked to try to remember, haven't you? Positive things that your mother would say to you.
Yes.
And you've been asked to remember positive things that your mother would do with you, too.
Yes.
Have you been able to come up with any more than what you just told us?
Objection, asked and answered.
Overall,
No.
What was the best thing about your mother from your standpoint as a child?
The way she smiled.
She had a nice smile.
Yeah.
And what would she smile about?
She would smile when I cleaned the house or did something nice for her. She would smile.
Would she smile if you won tournaments or won
Yes.
prizes or won trophies?
Yes.
Would she smile at you for any other reason that you've been able to remember?
No.
And did you do things to try to get her to smile?
Yes.
I have what appears to be your honor a Mother's Day card, some writing inside. 272. If I might mark it 272.
Yes, that is the next exhibit, number 272.
Mr. Menendez, do you recognize that?
Yes.
Did you make that?
Yes.
Did you make it in school or at home, or do you know?
I don't remember.
You have to speak from your...
I don't remember.
And do you recognize the writing inside?
Yes.
And is it your writing?
Mm-hmm.
Is that yes?
Yes.
Now, on the back page of the written part inside,
Yes.
is there a list of things there?
Yes.
And is the list of things there the things that you would do when you were little to get your mother to smile?
Yes.
Now, do you recall an occasion when you did things around the house in an effort to get your mother to smile that didn't work out quite right?
Yes.
And how old were you on this particular occasion?
I was playing tennis. I believe I was under 13.
Okay, you were over 11 and under 13?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do on that occasion?
I was baking a cake for her.
Okay, and what happened?
And I did something wrong in making the cake. I either turned up the temperature too much or put in the wrong ingredient or something, and the cake sort of went all over the oven. It spilled out and did a lot of things.
Okay, and what happened?
And I noticed this right before she got home with Lyle, and she came in the house, and I was trying to clean up the mess that I had made in the oven, and she saw it, and she got extremely upset.
Okay, and after she got extremely upset, what, if anything, did she do?
She saw what I did, and she started screaming, and she grabbed part of the cake and started throwing it at me, and I ran up to my room, and she chased me up there.
Was your mother ever physical with you? Did she ever hit you or slap you or hurt you?
Yes.
And what were some of the things she would hit you for?
I guess when I made her very angry.
Okay.
These type of things that I screwed up on. If I didn't vacuum the floor right, she wouldn't come over and hit me in the face. She would just pound on my chest or slap me if I wasn't doing my homework right, or not my homework, my testing. That's when she would get really angry for that as well. Just different things like that.
Mr. Menendez, did you bite your nails?
Yes.
Did you bite your nails when you were a child?
Yes.
And do you have recollections of riding in a car with your mother and biting your nails?
Yes.
And what would your mother do when you bit your nails?
She would, I would be biting my nails either next to her in the seat or in the back seat, and she'd hit her hand against my face where my hand was. She'd hit my hand into my face.
She'd smack you?
Yes.
And what would you do after she smacked you?
I would put my hand down, and I had the urge to bite my fingernails, and I couldn't stop. And so I would sort of gradually put my hand back up to my face, and she'd hit me again.
Okay, so smacking you didn't stop you from biting your nails?
No.
But would she continue to smack you even if you kept putting your hand back?
Eventually, if I kept putting my hand back up, she'd get too frustrated and keep hitting me, and I'd turn my back, and she'd start pounding on my back.
Now, did your father do a similar thing with respect to your nail biting?
Yes.
Did your father bite his nails?
Yes.
Anybody smack him in the face for doing it?
No, he just didn't want me to bite my fingernails.
Was your mother a very attentive cook?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did your mother ever scare you with the potential of burning down the house?
Yes.
And how would that come about?
Just when I would be upstairs in my room and there would be smoke coming up the stairs.
And how often did that happen?
That extreme only happened a couple of times when I guess she left the food in the oven and it was burning and it was coming out of the oven and the smoke would fill the house and go up the stairs. And she purposely disconnected the smoking alarm for that.
Okay, what would happen when the house filled with smoke?
She taught me how to get down on my knees and put I guess it was a hand cloth. She had something in the kitchen over my face that was wet. And she would have me practice being down on my knees, crawling under the smoke. She'd have Lyle do the same thing. And then crawl outside with the sliding glass door.
Now, you say that this type of incident where the house filled with smoke only happened a couple of times, but did she burn the food more often than a couple of times?
She burnt the food almost every day. She was absent-minded a lot, and she just did things like that.
Now, was it your mother's responsibility to get you to and from your various commitments with sports training?
Yes.
And would she drop you off on time?
No.
Would she pick you up on time?
No.
What experiences did you have of not being picked up on time?
I guess sometimes she was with Lyle, and sometimes Lyle and I would just wait, and I would just wait for a couple hours after I finished playing tennis or swimming.
And would this be during the daytime or at nighttime?
At night.
And how would you feel when you're waiting hours for your mother to pick you up?
Mistakes evidence.
Sustained.
Would you sometimes wait? You said you'd wait for a couple of hours?
Overall.
Yeah, one time I remember being at Petty waiting for over 2 hours.
I remember being at where?
Petty. It was a swim club. Not a club, but a swim school.
And you waited over 2 hours?
Yes.
Was that the only time you had a long wait for your mother?
No.
How often would this happen?
I usually had to wait anywhere between a half hour and an hour, but sometimes it was long, but not that often.
And would the other children be there waiting also?
Objection irrelevant.
Sustained.
This bears on his state of mind.
All
Right?
right, let's get on with it.
Would you be alone
Yes.
in the dark?
Yes, at night.
And how did you feel about your mother as being left alone this way?
I just felt like she had other things to do.
Did you think she cared about you?
I thought she cared about me. I just felt that I wasn't. She just had other things to do.
When you were living in Pennington, Mr. Menendez, were you ever forced to eat garbage?
Yes.
And who forced you to do that?
My father.
Objection, Your Honor. It's vague as to what you mean by garbage. It's apparently bad for health.
All right, why don't you specify what you're referring to?
Okay. You heard your brother testify that there was a rule in the house that if you didn't finish your meal, you had to eat it the next meal.
Yes.
And were you subjected to that rule more than he was?
Yes,
Who was the pickier eater, you or your brother?
I was.
And were there occasions when you would sit at the table for quite a long time?
Yes.
And were there any occasions when you tried to throw the food away?
Yes.
And on any of those occasions, did you throw the food away?
Yes.
And what happened after you threw the food away?
I remember one time my father went to the bathroom and I couldn't finish the string beans or the meat. And I threw it in the garbage, and when he came back, he saw my plate was empty, so he went to the garbage and he found it in there.
And were you forced to eat it?
Yes.
And was your mother present?
Yes.
You testified before that you had nightmares when you were a child, sometimes for 2-3 months in a row. Is that right?
Yes.
And do you recall any times when you would leave, do you recall leaving your bed, like sleepwalking?
Yeah, I had a strange thing with sleepwalking. Sometimes I'd be aware of it, and sometimes I wouldn't.
Did your mother have a particular way in which she would arouse you or wake you from your nightmares?
Yes.
And what was that method?
She'd put me in the bathtub underneath the cold water.
And how would you feel it when she was putting you in the bathtub?
I thought she was part of the nightmares that I was having, and I thought she was one of the monsters that was getting me, and I would fight against her. And so she'd have to drag me to the bathtub.
What was your first waking awareness when this would happen?
Being in the bathtub with the cold water.
So you'd be clothed or naked or what?
I would be in my underwear and my T-shirt.
In a tub of cold water.
Yes.
Do you recall being sent by your mother to, being sent by your parents to sports camp?
Yes.
And do you recall a year when you were sent to the Lawrenceville tennis camp?
Yes.
Did you want to go?
No.
Did you make the fact that you didn't want to go known to either of your parents?
Yes, it was really my mother who was doing the sending. My dad had just said, "You're going," so that was it.
Objection, Vegas, time.
All right, please specify when.
Okay. Do you recall in 1980 when you were going on 10 being sent to Lawrenceville?
Yes.
And did you let your mother know that you didn't want to go?
Yes.
Did you get sent anyway?
Yes.
Was this an occasion when you were being sent to camp and your brother was not going to the same camp?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have but I'd like to mark 273.
All right, let's do that at 1:30. We'll be in recess until 1:30, ladies and gentlemen. Don't discuss this matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it, and we'll resume at 1:30.
Now, in that letter, does your mother make reference to your attitude about going to camp?
Objection, calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Your Honor, it's to show the state of mind of the declarant,
Lack of
not,
foundation.
and I'm not having him read it.
Then it's irrelevant.
Well, but
Did you wish to approach and discuss it?
I don't want to interrupt now to do that. We can get back to it later. Do you recall what it was like at the Lawrenceville tennis camp for you?
Yes.
And what was your reaction to being at that camp?
I had to sleep there, and I didn't want to sleep there alone because they made me sleep in a bed. Apparently, the person that was supposed to be in the same room with me didn't show up, so I had to sleep there alone.
And why didn't you want to sleep there alone?
I don't know. It was just, I didn't like sleeping in a foreign place alone. It was just scary to me.
Okay. So did you try to communicate with your mother?
Yes, I told her this on the first night.
And?
I called her and I said, I can't sleep here. I'm very scared. And she said, it's a sleepover camp. You have to sleep there.
And did you have any other efforts to contact her?
Yes, I called her several times the first night because I couldn't sleep. I was having bad nightmares. And she just told me to stop embarrassing her because there were people around and just to sleep there and she'll deal with me in the morning.
And did you call her the next morning?
Yes.
And did she talk to you then?
Yes.
And what were the conversations like the next morning?
The next morning, she said that she would be there in the afternoon to deal with me. She was not happy. And I told her that I would try to make it through, but it was just difficult for me to sleep there at night.
Now, had you been to a camp before this?
Yes.
You remember your brothers testifying that he would get very homesick and lonely at camp and call home?
Yes.
And that your mother would refuse to accept his calls?
Yes.
Did anything like that ever happen to you?
Yes.
And was that at the same camp that your brother was at or a different camp?
We were at the same camp.
So did she refuse to collect calls from you as well?
Overall.
Yes. I would call her several times and ask her if I could come home. And eventually she just started refusing the calls.
Now, on this occasion, though, when you were at Lawrenceville by yourself, did she accept all your calls?
Yes.
And did she wind up coming to get you?
Yes.
And what was her demeanor and how did she talk to you when she came to get you?
She was extremely unhappy and would grab me by the arm and put me in the car and we drove away. I didn't even stay the entire camp, I don't believe.
Well, how many days were you there?
I was only there one night, but I don't believe I ever went back to the camp during the day.
I
In
don't
other words,
understand.
it was a sleepover camp, but you could stay there during the day and just stay there during the day and not sleep overnight. And,
In other words, you could sleep at home at night,
yes,
but she never took you back there?
I don't believe so.
Well, did she say anything to you when she was picking you up about how it made her feel?
Yeah, she said she was extremely embarrassed and that she was very embarrassed and she was very upset
She was embarrassed about what?
about the fact that I would call her and was too much of a sissy to be able to sleep at night, that her own son was not able to do that.
Now, Mr. Menendez, focusing you on the years in Pennington, was it routine for your mother to drive you to school in the morning?
Yes,
Was it typical for her to pick you up after school?
yes,
And generally speaking, did she tend to have the same demeanor or be in the same kind of mood on most days when she picked you up from school?
yes.
And could you describe for us what her mood would be like on most days when she picked you up from school?
Very rushed, very frazzled, very upset.
Did you know what she was upset about?
No, she was upset. She was almost always upset whenever Dad wasn't around, and she was just upset almost every day of her life.
And what was her mood or attitude towards you and your brother?
She took it out on us.
Well, what do you mean she took it out on you?
Well, she would pull up to the curb in a hurry. She drove real fast, and she would screech to the curb, and she would tell us to get in, and then she would drive us. We had to go to tennis in Northeast Racket Club for a long time, and she would be real harsh in the car. Whenever we made a sound, she'd tell us to shut up, or she would swing around and hit us, and we just had to be still in the car most of the time, because most of the time she was upset, and she didn't want anything to bother her, especially Lyle and I.
So did you enjoy these rides with your mother in the afternoons?
No, I hated it. I much preferred it when I was able to take the bus every once in a while.
And how would she drive?
She drove very fast.
And was fast the only distinctive characteristic of her driving?
Fast, reckless. She was always late, so she was always in a hurry to get someplace. So she would run stoplights if no one was coming, and she would do different things.
Did she ever drive in a way that made you feel your life was in danger?
Yes.
And what were those things that she did?
I remember many times she was not concentrating or paying attention and getting onto, in New Jersey, they had highways where you actually just got on through a stoplight. And she would go on the wrong side of the road, and we would be screaming, or she wouldn't see a stoplight, and so she would slam on her brakes, and the car would do a 180.
A 180?
It would turn all the way, almost facing the other direction by the time the steering wheel stopped. It was a big station wagon.
And would you try to say things to her about her driving? Mom, slow down. Mom, you're on the wrong side of the road. Anything?
Well, when we were on the wrong side of the road, yes. Otherwise, definitely not. Because when you said something, she just snapped at you. She got really harsh with you.
Did you understand as a child what it was that was making your mother so angry at you?
No, I had no idea.
Now, you mentioned at one point in your testimony that your mother would make you take the blame for things. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Is there an incident that you remember like that involving tennis rackets?
Yes.
Okay. Now, could you tell us about that incident? First of all, how old were you when this particular incident occurred?
I believe I was 12.
Okay.
And she had forgotten my tennis rackets. We were on the way to a tennis tournament. It was a Friday afternoon because it was the first round. It was right after school. And I had to obviously have my tennis rackets. But what she'd do is she'd pick me up from school with my tennis clothes if I wasn't wearing them that day and my tennis rackets. And on the way there, I noticed that she had forgotten the tennis rackets.
What were you doing on the way there?
I was changing, I believe.
In the car?
Yes.
And you noticed that your tennis rackets weren't there?
Yes, I looked in the back where they usually were to make sure she had the right rackets and this and that, and there were no rackets.
And what did that mean to you?
That meant that I was going to probably have to borrow somebody else's racket. I said,
But what did that mean to you?
it meant I was probably going to lose
Why?
because tennis rackets are very specialized, and if you don't have your own strung at the right tension and the right size and the right grip, you're not going to play nearly as well.
And what did it mean to you that you knew in advance or thought in advance that you were going to lose? What consequences, if any, would that have for
Well,
you?
if I lost first round in the Middle States tournaments, I was going to be punished by Dad, and I was afraid of that.
Okay. So when you noticed that the rackets were missing, what, if anything, happened?
I asked Mom where the tennis rackets were. I said, Mom, where are the tennis rackets? And she said, oh, aren't they back there? And I said, no, they're not back here. And she says, well, you're just going to have to borrow a racket when you get there.
Okay. And what happened?
I lost.
Did you borrow a racket when you got there?
Yes.
And you lost?
Yes.
And was there a conversation with your mother in the car on the way home?
Yeah, I wanted to know what we were going to say to Dad because I believe I was seeded number 2 in this tournament. I was one of the top 4, and I lost in the first round. And I wanted to know what we were going to say to Dad because,
Well, what do you mean? Why wasn't Dad just going to be told your mother forgot the rackets and you couldn't win playing with a different racket?
I was going to find out if that's what was going to be said. I was asking Mom, what are we going to say, Dad? What are we going to tell Dad happened? She said, well, you're just going to have to say you forgot the rackets. There's nothing else we can say. I couldn't just tell him that I played badly. There had to be a reason why I lost to this unranked kid.
Well, was it because you played badly or was it because you didn't have your rackets?
Well, I played badly because I didn't have my rackets. And so I was asking her, what are we going to do? And she said, you're just going to have to say you left them at school.
She didn't say, I'll say I forgot them.
Well, I asked I said, Dad's not going to be very happy that I left my rackets at school. And she got really angry. She was angry that I lost, and she got really angry. She said, well, we're not going to say that I left my rackets.
We're not going to say what, you popped.
She said that she wasn't going to say that I definitely couldn't say that she had left her rackets at home because Dad was going to be even less happy with her than angry with me.
Is that what she said?
Yes.
What did you expect your father to do if he heard that you lost the first round of this tournament because you had left your rackets at school?
Objection, can you get a time frame?
We did.
I was 12.
What did you expect your father to do?
I thought he was going to use the belt
And do what with it?
and hit me.
So did you say to your mother, but mother, if you tell Dad that I lost the rackets, he's going to beat me with the belt? Did you say that to her?
No, definitely not. I
Why
was,
didn't you say that to her?
because Mom was the one that usually told on me anyway when bad things happened so that she wouldn't get punished. And I definitely wasn't going to say, Mom, if you do this, Dad's going to use the belt on me, because she'd go right home and say that I told her that to Dad.
I don't understand. She'd go right home and tell Dad what?
That I told her that.
That you complained about his beating you?
Yes. And that you just didn't do.
Well, had you ever had a conversation with your father about whether or not your mother was a friend?
Yes.
And do you recall how old you were approximately when you had that talk with your father?
That was right around when the violent stuff started to happen. I was 11.
Okay. And what was the nature of that conversation with your father? I mean, what was it that was said, generally?
Dad was telling me not.
Is it offered for the state of mind of the witness?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
Will be received for that purpose only.
Thank you.
Dad was telling me not to tell Mom something. I don't remember what it was. The only thing that stuck out is that he said to me, Mom's not your friend, she's mine. Just remember that.
Remember that for what purpose?
Never to tell Mom anything that happened between Dad and I, or complain to Mom, because Mom would tell him.
And when your father told you that your mother was his friend and not yours, did that was that contrary to your experience as a child, or did that seem to match your experience as a child?
No, that definitely matched my experience.
And over the years, did that appear to become less true or more true?
More and more true, definitely in California. I mean, it stuck out in California.
Now, were there other kinds of behavior of yours that your mother routinely told your father about?
Yeah, definitely. Usually in swimming or tennis.
Okay, why don't we start with swimming? What kind of, well, you practiced your swimming, didn't you?
Yes,
Did you work hard to learn swimming?
I guess.
You don't know?
Yes, I worked hard.
I mean, do you remember being lazy or do you remember training hard?
No, I usually was training hard because either my mother or my father was there. When they weren't there, sometimes I was lazy.
How did you like swimming?
I hated the cold water.
And were there things that you would try to do to avoid having to be in the cold water?
Yes,
And what were the things that you try to do?
I would pretend to have lost my bathing suit. I would hide out in the bathroom. I would just do different things to stall or try not to get there. Or
Would you ever just cry and tell your mother you didn't want to continue to swim, you were too cold or you were uncomfortable? Or
well, that was after I had already been swimming and the water was freezing, and I would just start crying because I couldn't take it.
And what would she do if you were crying because you were uncomfortable?
She would tell me to stop embarrassing her, and she would tell me that if you keep this up, we're going to go home, and I'm going to tell your father that we had to leave because you were crying. Or she would put a towel over my head so no one would see her. She was
She
very
would put a towel over your head so no one would see her?
no, so no one would see me crying.
Okay,
She
because it
was-
embarrassed her?
Yeah, she really didn't like it when I cried in public.
Now, did she routinely tell your father if you had not been participating in swimming to the extent she wanted you to?
Yes,
And would you get punished for that?
yes.
Now, did she also tell on you with respect to tennis practice?
When I didn't follow out the written orders that my dad had passed down.
And would she tell on you having to do with just ordinary things during the day?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have another exhibit I'd like to mark 274. If I may approach.
Yes.
Mr. Menendez, does this appear to be a list of 9 things?
Yes,
And who wrote that piece of paper?
I did.
And do you recognize what that piece of paper was for?
Yes.
And what was it for?
It was for my dad.
And what is it?
It's a list of all the things that my mother had me write down that I didn't do right.
On a particular day?
Yes.
And what was going to happen with that list?
She was going to give it to my dad.
Could you just read the top entry?
What Erik did.
And what's the first thing on it?
Number 1.
Yeah, I know. What
Oh.
is it?
At home, Erik would not eat on. I'm not sure what that word is. Would not eat on time or tape.
Okay. And number 2 is,
At home, Erik would not go to sleep or get his pajamas on.
and is it similar kinds of things all the way down?
Yes.
Now, when one of these lists of things that you did wrong was given to your father, what would his reaction be?
He would punish me.
And would the punishments vary depending on, well, whatever?
Yes. It depended how bad the list was. This list wasn't as bad.
As some?
Yes.
What punishment would you expect from this list?
In this list, he would give me a long lecture, would probably slap me a couple of times. I don't know.
And this is not belt
No.
punishment list. Okay. Now, I'd like to turn your attention, if I could, to when the family was in California. Well, strike that. I'd actually like to do something else first. I'd like to turn your attention to your relationship with your brother. Okay? You heard your brother testify that when you were quite small, probably around 5, he did something to you.
Yes.
And how did you feel about him when those things were going on?
I didn't like him. I didn't like him at all. I I didn't want those things to happen.
And were there other things that he was encouraged to do to you by your father that made you not like him also?
Yes.
What things would he do with your father's encouragement?
Speculation.
Sustained.
Well, did you hear your father egging him on to do things?
Yes.
What would he egg him on to do?
When Lau and I were roughhousing, he would tell Lau where he should grab my joint so that it hurt most, where he should hit me, different things like that.
And did Lyle hit you and grab you when you were little?
Yes.
So was he your favorite person during those years?
He wasn't my favorite person.
Did he eventually become your favorite person in the family?
Yes.
Did your relationship with him over the years change?
Yes.
Now, you said that based on these things that he did to you that he talked about, that you didn't like it and didn't like him. Did your attitude about those things and him change?
Eventually.
And what changed them? Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yes. I resented Lau for a few years because of the things that he had done to me. And once the things with Dad started to happen, then I felt real guilty about that.
You felt guilty about what?
Resenting Lyle.
Why did you feel guilty about resenting Lyle when, I take it you mean the sexual things with your father were happening?
Yes.
So why did you feel guilty about resenting Lyle?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall.
Because I thought that this was supposed to be natural when my dad explained to me why it was supposed to be, and Lyle didn't explain to me any of those things, and so I thought that it wasn't.
You thought it wasn't when Lyle did it, and then when your father
I
explained?
realized that it was, and I felt guilty for resenting Lyle.
Okay. Now, did there come a time in your life when Lyle began to intercede on your behalf, particularly with your father?
Yeah, there came a time when Lyle started to intercede for me with all kinds of things.
Okay. Well, let's start out, though, with this. Was there a time that Lyle rescued you from drowning?
Yes.
And would you tell us how that came about?
Dad took us out on the Sunfish. He had this little sailboat for the lake, and the lake had a big ground part, and he would take us out into the middle of the lake. On this particular occasion, he wanted Lyle and I from the middle of the lake to swim to shore.
Now, before you go on, had your father told you scary stories about the lake?
Yeah.
Leading and suggesting.
Took you a while to get to that one.
Yeah, a lot of
All
choices.
right. Okay, objection is overruled.
Okay. And this is not being offered for the truth, Your Honor, but for the witness's state of mind. What stories did your father tell you about the lake?
He would tell me about the snapping turtles in the lake, which weren't really stories. I mean, they were true,
Okay.
but
Go ahead.
nothing.
What would he tell you about the snapping turtles in the lake?
He would just tell me about how the snapping turtles would bite people in the lake, and he would have a lot of fun while he was telling the stories, and then he would, jokingly try to push right after one of the stories Lyle or I into the water, and it wasn't that bad. It was just scary when you actually had to be in the lake.
Okay. Now, on this particular occasion when your brother rescued you, you said you were in the center portion of the lake and your father wanted you to swim from there to the shore.
Yes, he wanted Lyle and I.
Okay. And did you feel you could do that?
I wasn't sure. I'd never done it before.
Do you know how old you were?
I think it was 8,
Okay.
9.
Okay. So what happened?
He had Lyle go in first and swim, and then after Lyle, he had me. Not after, but right after. And so Lyle swam, and I didn't want to, but he got me in the water, and I started to swim.
How did he get you in the water?
He pushed me in the water.
I'm sorry?
He pushed me in the water.
He being your father?
Yes.
Okay. Go on.
And about halfway there, I didn't feel I was going to make it. And by the time I got even more there, I started to swallow in water, and it made me real scared, and I was just pushing with the water. And then I thought of the snapping turtles and I just panicked.
And what did you do?
I started screaming for help.
And what happened?
And Lyle swam back over and grabbed me and lifted me up in the water and then just took me to shore and said, it's going to be all right.
So he was able to get you ashore.
Yes.
And what happened after that?
My dad sailed over to the shore and was not happy.
What do you mean when you say your dad was not happy?
He was extremely upset. He grabbed us. He threw us on the boat. He told Lyle never to do that again, that I should have been able to make it and that I would have been able to make it. He just didn't give me a chance to make it and that he shouldn't be, helping me like that.
And then what happened?
He took Lyle and I out onto the middle of the lake and had Lyle swim to the other side of the shore and then had me swim to the other side.
And what was that swim like for you?
It was hard. I knew I had no choice but to make it at this point, and I just did it real slow, and I did it.
Now, this was after you had started competitive swimming, wasn't it?
Yes.
Were you afraid when you were put into the water in the lake?
Yes.
And did you communicate that fear to your father?
I don't remember doing so, but I'm pretty sure I did.
Do you remember an earlier time in Muncie when you were having trouble in a swimming pool?
Yes.
When you were going under several times?
Yes.
How old were you then?
It was before anything started happening with Dad, so I must have been 5, maybe 4.
And was your father at the side of that pool when you were having trouble in the water?
Yes.
And eventually did somebody...
Yeah, a stranger just reached over and grabbed me and lifted me up out of the water because I was just screaming for help.
But not your father?
No, my father wanted to see if I could make it.
Do you recall an incident where your father physically assaulted you on the home tennis court?
Yes.
Do you know how old you were when that occurred?
No.
Was it before or after your brother rescued you from the lake?
It was much after. It was, I guess I must have been, I was starting to play tennis, so I was probably 11 or 12.
And by the time you were 11 or 12, did you feel that your brother was your friend?
Yes, he had, my relationship with my brother began to change when I was 8 and 9. He was starting to protect me a lot from other kids, and I was still weary about the relationship. But
why were you leery about the relationship?
Just because Lyle and I would roughhouse a lot together, and he would pick on me a lot as the younger brother, and Dad would egg him on, and I sort of looked at Dad and Lyle as the same when I was real young.
Okay. Now, by the time you're 11 or 12, that's changed?
Yeah, because he would do things for me, like at school or at different places.
Can you remember, Mr. Menendez, the first time it occurred to you that your brother was on your side with respect to your parents?
With respect to my parents?
Yeah.
Yes.
And what was that incident, the first time you felt he was your ally?
That was when I was 11. I was studying for final exams in 6th grade, and there was a house being built down the street, and my parents had left the house. And so I went outside just to kick around the soccer ball with Velvet, my dog, and I heard some noises coming. And so I went down the street to see who it was, and it was Brendan, a kid that I knew. And
was Brendan a kid that you were friends with when you were at Hopewell Valley School?
Yeah.
Did he live in the neighborhood?
Yeah.
Was he, in fact, your only friend in the whole neighborhood?
Yes.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Did you have any friends besides Brendan in the neighborhood?
No.
Okay, so you found Brendan inside the house?
Yeah, and he was playing with 2 other girls inside the house. It was a new house being built, so anyway, the police showed up almost as soon as I got there, and I, not being aware of the situation, didn't get out of the house quick enough. But I ran because I was scared, and the police got Brendan and I and asked us where we lived. And I told them where I lived, and Brendan went to his house, and he told me to go back to my house and that the police was going to go talk to my parents. And so
Okay.
I hid out in the forest, and I heard the policeman talking to my brother.
Okay, what did your brother, so you heard the policeman telling your brother that you had been in this house?
Yes.
Okay. And what happened after that told you that Lyle was your friend?
Well, I heard the policeman saying to Lyle that a little kid like me at the time should not be in this house because there could be, he said, hobos and bums at the time. And I was just so afraid that Lyle was going to tell mom and dad. I was sure of it. And I figured that he had to. And so I didn't say anything to Lyle, and Lyle didn't say anything to me. And I wrote out a big, long entry in my journal and left it on the table so that my parents would see it before they got really angry at me and understand the situation.
I don't understand. You wrote an entry in your journal about what?
About what happened that night.
Where you would,
Just pretending it was my diary, but leaving it open on the table.
so that you could explain how you wound up in the house?
So I knew my mom would snoop and read, so she would just read it and understand what happened before Lyle told mom and dad what happened.
Okay.
But he never did.
And you did that for what purpose? Why did you want her to know what happened before Lyle told her?
So that I wouldn't get punished as bad.
Okay. So what happened?
Lyle never told mom and dad.
And how did that make you feel about him?
I began to realize that Lyle was on my side.
Now let's go back then to the tennis court when you're 11 or 12. What happened between yourself and your father that day?
I was on the same side of the court with Lyle, with Dad, and Lyle was on the other side. And I wasn't moving my feet enough. I had to keep my feet moving for all the time I was on the tennis court, and I was tired, and I was dragging my feet. Finally, he just got too angry with me after telling me enough times to move my feet.
Who's he?
My father.
Okay.
So he just grabbed me and lifted me up onto the fence a few feet off the ground and ripped my shirt. And Lyle came running over, and he wasn't going to interfere with Dad, but he just said, it's okay, calm down, quietly behind Dad. Dad didn't hear me.
He's making this gesture to whom?
To me.
To try to calm you down?
Yeah, I was crying.
And why do you think he was trying to calm you down?
Because he loved me.
Objection sustained. The answer's triggered.
Would your father react in a certain way if you were crying versus if you weren't crying when
Yes.
he was angry?
Yes, if I wasn't crying, it wouldn't be as bad. And so he was trying to get me to stop crying so Dad wouldn't.
Okay. And what happened after that?
Dad threw me in the basement and just lectured me. Nothing really happened that bad.
And why does this stick out in your mind? Why is this so significant that your brother did this?
Because the incidences where my brother helped me, either with other people or with my mom and dad, just really stick out in my mind. I don't know why.
Okay.
I-
Was there another incident with your father that involved some plate glass doors?
Yes.
And what was that about?
Dad was again angry at me because I wasn't playing well on the tennis court, and he was over my shoulder yelling at me in my ear, and I just said, all right, and he just, not something you're supposed to do, and he just grabbed me and slammed me into the glass.
And what happened?
The glass shattered, and he just grabbed me again and slammed me through it all the way until the glass broke and I fell on my butt.
Was your mother home when this happened?
She was in the kitchen.
And did she respond to it?
At first, she jumped up, not knowing what happened, and then she saw it was just Dad throwing me through the glass, so she didn't say anything.
And was the glass cleaned up?
Yes, I did that.
And did someone order you to clean it up, or did you just?
Dad told Mom to tell me to clean up the glass.
And did that happen?
Yes.
Was Lyle there on that occasion?
I don't remember Lyle being there.
Was Lyle someone you admired as a child?
Yes, very much so.
Why?
Because he was bigger, he was smarter, he was better looking, he was everything that I wanted to be, according to my parents and according to me.
You did want to be like him.
Yes.
You admired him.
Mhm.
And did you feel from 11 on that He was a good brother to you?
Leading.
Overall.
Yes.
Now I'd like to turn your attention to when the family moved to California. You've heard a lot of different witnesses, including your brother, testify about your parents' relationship over the years. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, did you notice any significant differences in, first of all, the relationship between your parents after the move to California?
Oh, yes.
And did you notice any significant difference in the way your mother related to you after you moved to California?
Yes.
All right, let's start with this. When you first got to California, you said you lived in the Oakwood Apartments.
Yes.
And that was the time when you said your parents were talking about divorce.
Divorce.
And affairs, and your mother was crying a lot, right?
Yes.
At some point, Mr. Menendez, did the discussion about divorce stop?
Yes.
And at some point, did you notice a difference in the way your mother talked to your father?
Yeah, the whole relationship in the family sort of changed.
Okay, would you tell us, first of all, what was different?
Basically, my mom's behavior and my dad's behavior toward my mom.
Okay, let's start with that. The way your mother behaved towards your father and the way your father behaved towards your mother.
All right, can you pin it down a little bit?
Can you give me a time? Is this something that suddenly
After
appeared?
we moved to California, I would say as soon as the divorce stopped, they stopped talking about the divorce.
How long after you moved to California did they stop talking divorce, at least to the extent you could hear it?
It's 6 months.
Okay. So after the first 6 months, you noticed this difference in their relationship.
Yes.
And would you describe what was different?
My mom was very depressed a lot and crying a lot, but she also got a lot more angry than she had done before, and she got a lot more angry at Dad, more vocal toward Dad, and Dad would back down. He wouldn't fight her. Before, he used to just go and hit her, but now he would just back down and not yell back so much. Sometimes he'd go, "All right, kitty, all right," but he wouldn't really be aggressive with her.
Was that different than kitty, which is what he used to do?
Well, he did that when he got so angry that he was really, really angry with her, but it happened very, very infrequently.
In the earlier days, would he just cut her off like that all the time?
He would cut her off, or he would just yell at her. And I mean, it depended. If we were in the house, and there were two different types. If we were in the house, he would yell at her, and he would get angry at her, and he would hit her. If we were outside, and she was yelling or saying things that he did not want her to say to different people, then he would shut her up like that.
That's the earlier times. Now we're in California. Now she's yelling at him and he's backing down.
He would always do that, though. He would always say kitty if he didn't want her to do things.
Okay, but I'm talking about now in California. She's yelling at him and he is backing down, you said.
Yes.
And that's different.
Yes, it's different.
And what did you think had caused this difference?
Well, I had suspected that it had to do with the divorce and Louise.
Okay. And you suspected what about the divorce and Louise? Divorce talk had stopped. So
Yeah.
what did you think this meant?
I didn't exactly know what it meant because I didn't understand why it would be the relationship would change to the extreme that it did over just this 8-year affair that Dad, I mean, Dad had a serious affair and Mom found out, and she said basically from the parts that I could hear through the wall that if they divorced, he would not want to get a divorce. But it seemed too drastic a change. I didn't quite understand what it fully meant.
When you were growing up, did your mother appear to be afraid of your father or not afraid of your father?
Afraid of my father.
Did she appear as afraid of your father in California?
No, not at all.
Now, you have described, and many other people have described, that your mother would have these very severe outbursts in the early years in Pennington.
Yes.
Okay. Did she have similar outbursts in California?
Yes.
And were they less frequent in California, more frequent?
I would say more frequent.
When your mother would have these outbursts, I mean, all the way through, would she necessarily be rational in the things she was angry about or the things she was saying?
Definitely not. A lot of things started to change with that. She became
With what?
with mom and her moods, and she became a lot less rational. I for the first time I saw her drinking a lot more than she had before. She was taking a lot of drugs and a lot of the pills that she had to take, and she just became severely irrational at times.
Would she say things that made no sense?
She would say and do things that made no sense.
Okay. Now, the last summer, the summer of 1989, I think you've already testified that you noticed that she was not taking her medication.
Yes.
Rephrase the question.
Okay. Did you notice a change in your mother's pill taking over that last summer?
Yes.
And what was the change?
She wasn't taking her medication.
She wasn't taking the pills.
Yes.
And did that improve her level of, was she calmer? Was she more rational without the medication?
No, I wanted her to start taking it. I didn't say that to her, but I didn't like the fact that she wasn't taking it because her moods became worse.
And you said you wouldn't say that to her. Why wouldn't you say it to her?
Because I didn't want to be the subject of her harshness again. I just didn't want to focus too much attention on me. I try to do that as little as possible.
Did you ever have the kind of relationship with your mother where you could talk to her about personal things?
No.
Now, when was it, Mr. Menendez, when you first heard anything about your mother and poison?
In the Calabasas house.
Do you remember what year?
Yeah, it was that same year that things changed. It was late 87. It was after I broke up with Kirsten.
And when you were living in the Beverly Hills house, was there an occasion when your father brought up the possibility that your mother was seeking to poison you all?
Yes.
Now, didn't that seem kind of bizarre to you, the idea that your mother would poison you? And didn't you just reject that out of hand as impossible?
No, I pretty much by that time thought my mother was capable of anything. I mean, that was after she bought the gun and said what she said there. I mean, I knew my mom was she was very suicidal. She was very depressed, and she was capable of anything because she was very angry.
Well, did you think she was capable of killing herself?
Yes.
And did you think she was capable of killing other people?
Whoever she was angry with at the time.
So she was both depressed and angry?
Yes.
When you were a child and a teen living back east, were you afraid of your mother?
I was afraid, but pretty much just afraid of her outbursts, afraid of getting hit, not of anything like that.
Well, during those last months in California, did you become afraid of your mother in a different way?
Well, I was afraid of my mother living in the Beverly Hills house when she stopped taking her medication, for sure. But before then, I mean, when Dad said to me what he said in May, I knew he was taking it seriously, and he didn't think she was going to do anything right away. But he just thought that he would threaten me with it. And
But my question
lost your
is,
question.
you said that earlier you were afraid of your mother's anger, okay? Now, were you afraid of her, say, the last year?
Yes.
Was it the same fear? Were you just afraid of her anger, or was it a different kind of fear?
Then in Pennington?
Yes.
Oh, yes, much different.
And what was the difference?
And she could hurt me on purpose rather than by accident. When I was in Pennington, she would throw things at me or she would do things, and if I got hit in the head, it would be by accident. I knew she didn't mean to do that, even though she did it. But in California, it was different. I knew she could do things on purpose.
Now, you've discussed a difference in the relationship between your parents, okay, where your mother did not seem to be afraid of your father anymore. Was there a difference in the way your mother treated you?
Yes.
And could you just generally summarize what that difference was in California?
She wouldn't protect me from Dad anymore at all. In fact, she would usually take his side in things.
Okay, now I haven't heard much about, and we haven't heard much about her protecting you from Dad before.
Counsel, let's not ask questions that way.
What do you mean by her protecting you anymore? When had she protected you?
Well, it wasn't. I don't remember what I just said, but before, she would, when Dad would get angry at me, she would sometimes say Jose. She would not get involved, and she would allow Dad to do what she did. Now she would take an active role, is what I'm trying to say.
She join in with him?
Yes.
Did she seem to be more like Dad's ally in California or more like his ally in New Jersey?
Objection made.
Rephrase the question.
Yes. Did your mother seem to be more or less like your father's ally when you lived in California?
More. In Pennington, she wasn't Dad's ally. She was afraid of Dad, and she would lie and to get me in trouble, to get the trouble off her, which I understood. But in California, it was different. She was more joined with Dad.
Okay. And now if we could, Mr. Menendez, turning to that Thursday night, that last Thursday night, when your mother told you that she knew what your father had been doing with you all those years. Do you remember that?
Objection, that misstates the evidence.
Rephrase the question.
How did you interpret the things that your mother said to you in the den that Thursday night when you were on your way to the guest house?
That she knew about Dad and I.
And that she had known?
And that she said she had always known.
Okay. And she always meant all those years, didn't it?
Objection made.
I really,
Objection sustained.
What did that mean to you?
that she knew and that she had known, and she had always known. She said, I really wasn't thinking about all of those years. I just thought about the fact that she knew that my dad was doing this all the time, and I was in shock.
Now, after you talked to your brother that Thursday night and you found out what he had said to your father and you felt that you were going to be killed, okay? What did you think was your mother's interest in keeping the secret secret?
She had a big interest. My mom in California had become really, the image had been a big thing with her. She liked to cater parties. She liked to have parties at the Beverly Hills house, and this would destroy everything that she had ever worked for.
Did you think her interest was any different than your father's interest in
No.
keeping?
Of course not.
So it was the same.
Yes. It's about keeping the secret.
Now, Mr. Menendez, I want to return you back to Sunday night, August 20th, 1989. Okay? Okay.
Yes.
I think we stopped before when the police arrived at the house. And do you recall what emotional condition you were in when the police arrived at the house?
I was hysterical.
Was that genuine hysteria?
Yes.
And do you know what had caused it?
Excuse me?
Do you know what had caused it? What made you?
Seeing my parents. I think also shooting them caused it. Just the whole night.
Were you happy about what you had done?
No, it was beginning to hit me what I had done when I went back to the house that night, and I couldn't accept that.
My question was, were you happy about
No,
it?
I was not happy.
Have you ever been happy about it?
No.
Now, On the way back to the house from Santa Monica, did you and your brother discuss the things that you were going to tell the police once you called them?
Yes.
Did you discuss not calling the police and just leaving town?
No.
Did you discuss, let's go back home and make it look like a burglary?
No.
Did you discuss, let's go back home, get the guns from the closet, load them up, and stick them in the den?
Objection, yes.
Overruled.
You understand the question?
No.
Did
I
you
didn't.
discuss with your brother, well, let's go back to the house, let's go up to mom's closet, let's get the rifles, let's load them up, let's stick them down in the den and make it look like
No.
they were shooting? So you didn't think of any of those things?
No.
What were the 3 things that you and your brother discussed telling the police?
That we went to the movies.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
one.
And that we.
Counsel, is there some reason to believe that there are just 3? Why don't you rephrase the question?
Were there just 3 points that you wanted to make with the police?
I don't really remember how many points there
Why
were.
Why
There
don't
was
you tell us what the things were that you and Lyle were going to say to the police?
that we went to the movies, and then we went to meet Perry at the Civic Center. And I remember Lyle.
Just that you went to the movies.
Yes.
That you went to meet Perry at the Civic.
And then I went home for my ID.
Right. Is that it?
No, there's one other.
What's the one other?
He told me to say that we parked in the back.
Okay. So there were 4 things.
Yeah, I guess that's all. Yeah.
4 things. The thing is, you told the police that you parked in front. I mean, you did park in front.
Yes.
So you didn't tell the police you parked in back.
Is that a question?
Did you
Rephrase it.
did you tell the police you parked in back?
Yes.
But your car's parked in front.
Counsel, let's not argue. Ask the question.
I don't understand. Perhaps I'm not understanding. Did you park the car in front when you went back?
When we went back, yes, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when we left the house. Lyle wanted me to have it very clear that we parked in back because he figured that somebody had to have seen us run out of the house that night.
Okay, so you're saying that you were supposed to tell the police that when you left your house that night to go to the movies, you pulled out from the back.
Yes.
Okay. And did you go over and over on the ride home these 4 things that you were supposed to tell the police?
No, not at all. Lyle was worried.
Well, you were worried about whether you could tell them that story, weren't you?
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
Were you worried about whether you could tell that story?
Yes, Lyle.
Were you worried?
Yes, I was worried about that
And why were you worried about that?
because I was not thinking very clearly, and I didn't know what would come out of my mouth at that time.
And did your brother appear to be worried about whether he'd be able to tell the story?
He was worried about that, but he was also worried on the way down to the station whether he asked me, "Are you going to be able to do this? If you're not, let me know."
Did you go over the points?
No.
You remember going back to the car after you were at the police station later that morning in order to remove anything that was left in it?
That's why we went back.
Yes. And do you remember doing
Yes.
that? And do you remember finding anything, you personally, inside the car?
We weren't allowed access to the car right away.
Yes, eventually were you?
We went back at 5:30, and then they told us to come back. And we did around 8.
Yes.
And we found some things, yes.
Yes. Did you personally find something
Yes.
in the car? Yes?
Yes.
What did you find?
An empty shell
And where was that empty shotgun shell?
underneath the front seat. Underneath the front seat,
So it was in the passenger compartment of the car.
yes.
Now, you were interviewed at the police station by Sergeant Edmonds. You remember him?
Yes.
And how did he treat you?
He was very nice.
And at the end of your interview with him, oh, and did you remember the 4 things you were supposed to tell him?
Yes.
And when you finished talking to him and you left his company, did you say something to your brother?
Yes.
And what was the point of your saying what you said to your brother?
So that he would know that I didn't tell them what happened. And then I just told him, told Sergeant Edmonds what we had worked out.
The 4 things.
Yes. I just said, it's okay. You can go in and talk to him. I didn't.
Yes,
I
and
made it through.
that was the signal, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Objection, meeting is closed.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
Was that a
Council
signal?
would move a lot quicker if you would not ask these leading questions and just ask it in a different form.
Well, maybe we would, maybe not, Your Honor.
Council, just do it in a legally proper fashion.
Your Honor, I think we need a break, frankly.
Well, let's go ahead a little farther here.
Well, may I approach?
A little farther.
Now, at the end of the tape with Sergeant Edmonds, do you recall what happened to you emotionally?
Yes.
What?
I broke down.
Okay. And was that real?
Yes.
And do you remember asking him something?
Yes.
And what did you ask him?
I asked him if my parents were dead
Well, why'd you ask him that?
because I wanted to hear it from a police officer. I had trouble accepting that.
But you knew they were dead.
I knew they were dead, but there's something, it was just, I couldn't accept that.
Did you think that you were in good shape mentally and emotionally after
I wasn't.
Sunday? Now, on September 17th, 1989, you were interviewed by Detective Zoller in New Jersey.
Yes, I was.
And did you tell Detective Zoller basically the same 4-point story?
Yes.
On September 17th, and for strike that. I'm sorry, I'm really kidding you.
All right, we'll take our recess, let council gather their materials, and we'll resume at 3 o'clock. We'll be recessing at 4:20 to accommodate an appointment of one of the jurors. So we'll resume at 3 o'clock and hopefully go until 4:20.
In court of the statement that you gave to Detective Zoller on September 17th, 1989. Is that right?
Yes.
And where were you when you gave that interview?
At my Aunt Terry's house.
And were you expecting Detective Zoller to be there?
Yes.
And were you awake when he came to the house?
Yes.
Now, do you remember in the course of that interview with Detective Zoller telling him, and I'm referring to the prosecution version of the transcript, page 10, telling him that when you and your brother returned to the house on Sunday, August 20th, there was a lot of smoke in the room?
Yes.
Now, in fact, Mr. Menendez, did you know on September 17th that when you and your brother returned from Santa Monica, there was no longer any smoke in the room?
Yes.
Do you have any idea why you told Detective Zoller that there was smoke in the room?
No.
Now, there was smoke in the room at the end of the shooting, correct?
Objection, meeting.
Rephrase the question.
Was there smoke in the room after the shooting was over?
Yes.
Did you also tell Detective Zoller, and this refers to page 11, that when you and your brother returned to the house, you could smell smoke in the house?
Yes.
Now, did you know, in fact, that the smoke was gone, so of course you couldn't have smelled it?
Yes.
Did you, in fact, on September 17th, tell Detective Zoller that you smell the smoke every day? Every day, I remember the smoke.
Yes.
Did you tell him, in describing the smoke, it was just a slow haze? The room was like dark yellow. It was like a full, slick haze.
Yes.
Is that what it looked like to you at the end of the shooting?
Yes.
It did not look like that to you, though, did it, when you came back?
Objection, leading.
Rephrase the question.
Did it look like that when you came back?
No.
Now, in fact, Mr. Menendez, as of September 17th, had you been seeing and smelling smoke every day, as you told Detective Zoller?
Yes.
And did you continue to see and smell smoke after September 17th?
For a long time after.
How often?
Many times a day, whenever I would hear a car engine and I would smell the smoke of the fumes. Sometimes when someone was cooking, anytime there was smoke, I smelled it and I thought about it.
Did you also picture what it looked like in the room after the shooting?
Oh yes, every day.
And did it take anything to prompt you to picture that?
No.
Did you go on picturing that even after you were arrested?
Yes.
Did you ever have any difficulty in stopping yourself from picturing that?
Objection, irrelevant.
Overall.
I wasn't able to stop myself from picturing it. Anything would spark it, anything would remind me, and I would see them in the room, and I couldn't stop it.
Now, did you also on September 17th did you ask this question of Detective Zoller? This is on page 18. Did you ask him, you ever figure it was someone they knew?
Yes.
And were you were talking there, were you not, about that the people who killed your parents was someone your parents knew?
Yes. Because
Were you therefore suggesting to
Counsel,
detectives?
let's not lead the witness.
What were you trying to suggest to him?
he kept thinking that it was someone maybe they didn't know, and I was trying to say maybe it was someone they knew.
Do you know why you were doing that?
No, I don't know why. I just was doing it.
Did Detective Zoller follow up on this question? Did he start to probe you?
No.
Do you recall telling him on page 28 that your life was part of your father's dream?
Yes.
Did you feel your life was part of your father's life?
I thought he lived through us, yes.
And were you therefore telling Detective Zoller
Counsel, again, let's not lead the witness.
were you telling Detective Zoller a lie there or the truth?
The truth.
Do you know why you were telling him that?
Partly.
Okay.
Partly because there were so many things that I was confused about and so sad about that I was just telling him a lot of things about my life that I felt. I was trying to hide certain things, but certain things just came out.
Do you remember telling him that there was some conflict with your dad in last May or April? He thought that I wasn't opening up in tennis.
Yes.
And why were you telling that to Detective Zoller?
I'm not sure. It was just about the conflict I had with Dad.
So you were telling him that there was a problem?
Yes.
Did he follow up on that?
Objection, leading.
Overall.
Did
Excuse me?
Detective Zoller follow up? Did he ask you about what this problem meant or how it affected you?
No.
And did you then tell Detective Zoller, we wanted to go to college really bad. We were getting away from him, you know. We were trying to stay away and doing other things. Do you remember telling him that?
Yes.
Who was the him you were telling him you were trying to get away from?
Dad.
Did he follow up on that? Did he ask you why were you trying to get away from him?
No.
Do you also recall telling Detective Zoller, this is page 35, when I was young, I used to love everything. I couldn't break a branch off a tree, a leaf off a tree or something. I used to love everything. I wouldn't want to hurt anything. And it seems that as one gets older, they have to experience things and life is colder. Remember telling him that?
Yes.
Do you know what you were thinking about when you were telling him that?
In essence,
What were you thinking about?
that I killed my parents.
Did he follow up on that? Did he ask you, what do you mean life is colder? What do you mean you wouldn't have wanted to hurt anything?
No.
Now, while you were in New Jersey, in September, during the trip when Detective Zoller interviewed you, did you see your family doctor?
Yes.
And was this the same doctor that you had seen during your childhood?
Yes.
And why did you go see him?
Because of the terrible pains that I had in my stomach.
And how long had you been experiencing those pains in your stomach?
About 3 weeks.
Had you experienced pains in your stomach before your parents were killed?
Yes.
And for how long before?
About a week.
And they continued after?
Yes.
Were there other things that you were experiencing after that you had not experienced before?
Well, yes, of course.
What things were you experiencing after your parents died?
Objection, irrelevant.
Can you be more specific as to
Okay.
subject matter?
Were there things, emotional things you were experiencing after that contributed to your going to the doctor?
Yes.
And what were those things?
Just flashes of them, flashes of things that my dad used to do to me, and it was confusing, and it would really, just the guilt, thinking of what kind of a person I was, really tore me apart, and it just made me, it gave me a lot of pain.
Concerning going to see the doctor in New Jersey, did you have certain physical symptoms that led you to go there?
Yes.
Had the pain in your stomach caused you to do or not do anything?
Caused me to go to the doctor.
Okay. Did you lose weight, Mr.
I
Menendez?
lost a lot of weight.
Okay. Why did you lose weight?
I just didn't feel like eating.
And why didn't you feel like eating?
Irrelevant.
Overall,
Because of how I felt and how just how miserable I was.
So it was not just because of the pain in your stomach you didn't eat, it was also because of your mental
The
state?
pain in the stomach didn't have anything to do with not eating. It all had to do with the same thing, that I had killed my parents, and of how I felt about it. And so I lost weight, and I had this horrible pain in my stomach.
Were you feeling sorry for yourself at this time?
Partly.
Were you feeling sorry for anything else?
Yeah, I was feeling very bad about killing my parents.
After your parents died, did your relatives come in to California from out of town?
Yes.
Did they talk about your parents?
Yes.
How did they make them sound?
They made them sound as if they were these incredible people, and these people that they were in awe of, and these powerful and wonderful people.
Good people.
Yes.
And after being around your relatives, did you start thinking about whether they were good or you were good or both?
Yes.
What did you start thinking?
I was so confused. I mean, I had thought that they weren't these people that they were describing, and if these were such wonderful people, then I just thought it made me a really bad person, really, really bad person.
And is that what you thought of yourself?
Yes.
And did you start having a certain type of dream after your parents died and after you had been around your relatives?
Objection, you're on the approach.
yes.
Mr. Menendez, before your parents died, had you received any information from your father concerning whether or not you were in his will?
Yes.
And when had you received the information from your father?
Almost the year before.
Do you recall what month it was that you received the information?
In September.
What year?
September 1988.
And in September of 1988, what information did you receive from your father?
He told me that I was out of the will. He told me that both of us were out of the will, but he told me that I was out too.
And did you believe him?
Yes, he was serious.
Now, in May of 1989, did you have a discussion with your mother about being disowned by your father?
Yes.
Now, in your mind, Mr. Menendez, is there a difference between being disinherited and being disowned?
I'm not sure if there was before then, but certainly then there was a difference because I knew I was already disinherited. So
You knew you were already disinherited as of when?
as of September,
So the conversation in May with your mother, what does that have to do with?
it had to do with me not reporting to Dad every bit of my tennis matches and my tennis practice when he wasn't around.
And what was it your mother said was the effect of your not reporting to Dad every bit of your tennis?
He was going to disown me.
And what did disown mean to you?
I wasn't sure what it meant, but I knew it meant something very bad because I didn't think he was going to let me leave the house, so I didn't quite know what was going to happen.
Well, ordinarily, what would disown mean to you?
Disown mean kicked out of the house, have nothing to do with you.
Okay. And did you think that was going to happen?
I couldn't imagine that was going to happen. That's what worried me.
Why did it worry you?
Well, because if that wasn't going to happen, then something else something else was going to happen that was equally the same. I assumed that was bad, and I didn't know what was going to happen.
Why didn't you think it meant that he would kick you out of the house?
Because I knew there was no way he was going to let me leave the house with me knowing all these things about him. I didn't think that for a second.
You didn't think he'd just throw you out on the street when you had the secret?
Of course not.
Objection, pleading, motion.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
What was it that made you think he wouldn't kick you out of the house?
Again, is this his thought in May of '89?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, let's phrase it in that fashion.
Okay, in May of 1989, why was it that you did not think your father would just kick you out of the house?
Because my father wasn't just going to let me leave with this information. He was never going to just kick me out of the house. That was not a possibility. And so obviously I knew that.
So did you have any idea what disown meant?
No, and that's what I was worried about.
But it worried you.
Yes.
Now, after your parents died, did you receive information that you had not, in fact, been disinherited?
Yes.
And who did you receive that information from?
My Aunt Martha.
And do you recall how it came about that you received information from your Aunt Martha?
She was talking to Lyle and I at one of the hotels and telling us what the financial things were of the estate.
What the assets were?
Yes.
And do you recall, when you heard her, do you recall saying something to her?
Well, I told her that
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled.
I told her that we weren't in the will, so it didn't matter in terms of relating to us because she was saying how we were going to be set up to go to college and be able to live. And I said, Martha, you may have to talk to my grandmother, whoever was going to inherit, because I told her what happened between my dad and I.
Let me back up, okay? What is she trying to tell you?
That we're going to inherit this.
You're going to inherit what?
The money.
Okay, she's trying to tell you how much?
Yes.
She's trying to tell you what
Counsel, again, let's not
She-
lead. You can ask him what
she
she
was-
said.
She was telling me that there were certain life insurance policies that how much this house was worth and this house was worth and how much my dad owed. She was telling me all kinds of things that I wasn't completely understanding, but I was just telling her there's no reason for me to
There's no reason for you to what?
completely understand it when she was trying to explain what I didn't understand because it didn't really matter to me anyway. I mean, I was interested in it, but it wasn't going to come to me. So,
Is that what you were telling her, that
Yes.
it wasn't going to come to you?
yes.
Okay. And did you explain to her why it wasn't going to come to you?
Yes, I told her what my father had told me,
And that was what?
that we were out of the will.
And in that same discussion with your Aunt Martha, was there also a discussion about insurance?
Yes.
And can you recall what the discussion about insurance was?
She was telling us about different insurance policies that my father had. One of them in particular I remember because I had heard about it before.
Okay. What was that?
That was this company insurance. It was a $5 million insurance.
And is that a policy that your father had?
No, he did not have that.
And how did you know that?
Because my mom and him used to talk about the fact that he needed to take this exam to get it, and that he was going to soon.
Going too soon as of when?
He was going to in September, I believe.
Had you heard that at home, that he was going to take an exam?
Yes, he was trying to get mom off his back. He said, I'm planning on taking it in September, just because mom and him were discussing it often.
So what was your state of mind with respect to the $5 million policy? Did he have it or did he not have it?
He didn't have it.
And was there any doubt in your mind about that?
No, I knew he didn't have it. He was going to get it the next month.
And did your Aunt Martha nevertheless bring this up as a possible asset?
I don't know if she completely understood that he didn't have it, or I'm not sure what was in her mind, but I was telling her what was in my mind, and she wasn't someone that she was stubborn in that respect, saying, no, this is the situation. I was saying, no, it wasn't, and finally I just gave up.
You were trying to tell her it didn't exist.
Yes.
Did she talk to you about another insurance policy?
Yes.
And was that something you knew about before?
No.
And what was your reaction when she told you there was another insurance policy?
I said, great, but I was trying to tell her that it wasn't going to us, so he can have $6 million insurance policies, and it didn't matter.
Was she telling you it was a $6 million insurance policy?
No.
What was she telling you?
It was a $600,000 policy, I believe.
And you were telling her that you wouldn't be getting that?
Yeah, she was saying that we were going to get it within 10 days or in a short amount of period. And I was telling her, I don't think that's going to happen. And she was saying, it is going to happen. And I was saying, fine, I hope it does happen, but I don't think so.
And why did you think you wouldn't be getting the insurance?
Because we weren't in the will, so we weren't going to be getting the money.
Did you think that insurance came through a will?
Yes.
Now, in the course of this conversation, was your brother expressing similar sentiments as yours?
Yes, he was more exasperated because he was more concerned with other things, and he didn't believe what Aunt Martha was telling him, so he was less concerned.
My point is, was he saying the same things?
Yes.
That you guys were disinherited, that he knew there was no $5 million policy, the same things you were saying?
Objection sustained.
Your Honor, I'd like to approach just to outline something for as far as what jury.
All right, you may continue.
Mr. Menendez, at some point in September, did you receive some of the money from that second insurance policy that your Aunt Martha told you about?
Yes.
And did you, after that, seek advice from various adults
Yes.
concerning what to do?
Uh-huh.
Could you just tell us who the people were that you sought advice from?
Aunt Martha, mostly my cousin Henry. There was a probate attorney named Steve. I talked to him a lot. I just wanted to know really what to do with all this money and what to do with my life.
And were you seeking advice from people concerning what to do with your life in addition to what to do with the money?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
You said you wanted to know what to do with the money and what to do with your life. What do you mean when you say what to do with your life?
Well, after I wasn't able to get into Princeton, I didn't quite know what to do. So I talked to different people about what I should do, and where I was and what was going on.
And what did you decide to do?
I eventually decided to hire Mark as a permanent coach
And to do what with your time?
to play tennis.
To play tennis for recreation or for something else?
I never played for recreation. To play tennis full time, so play tennis full time.
As a career?
I didn't know if it was going to be a career. I didn't know what was going to happen, so I just made it for a year and see what happened the next fall. Whether I was going to go to college or continue in tennis, I really wasn't sure.
Were you having any difficulty in making decisions?
Yes.
Now, at some point, were you with your cousin Henry in October of 1989 when Dr. Oziel's name came up?
Yes.
And how did Dr. Oziel's name come up in that conversation?
Well, I had been seeing Henry a lot and talking to him about how depressed I was and how I thought about killing myself and different dreams that I had. And he said that, he would talk to me and just sit and try to comfort me. But he said, you really need to see Dr. Oziel. He said that he had called Dr. Oziel, in fact, and because of these conversations, and that he wanted me to go see him.
Who had called Dr. Oziel because of these conversations?
Henry.
Now, had Dr. Oziel been around the family at the hotel and at the memorial service?
Yes.
And had your cousin Henry, excuse me, come in contact with him then?
I assume so. I don't specifically remember. I mean, all of my relatives, I think, did. I'm not sure.
And during the time that Dr. Oziel was around you at the hotels and the memorial service, did he have any conversations with you concerning financial matters?
Yes.
And what did he say to you concerning financial matters?
Just that he had this own attorney that he thought we should hire for probate, since there was a young attorney coming on to do the estate, and he said that wasn't a good idea and that we should hire his attorney, and that he had a lot of good ideas of what to do when the money came in.
And did he tell you what those good ideas of his were?
Not specifically. He just said that he had a lot of different companies and a lot of different things and a lot of great ideas, and that.
And he brought that up with you when you were at the hotel?
Yeah.
And were there discussions at the hotel about the estates? The fact that there was a will that would be probated and that there was
Yes.
estates?
I mean,
Yes.
it changed. At first, I didn't think I was in the will, and so I told him, it's not going to us. But after I found out that apparently I was going to, he started talking to me a lot more and just giving me different advice. He was telling me what I should invest it in, and that he had these ideas that maybe would work out really well, and that I should call him.
Mr. Menendez, my question, though, was at the hotels, apart from Dr. Oziel, were there discussions among the family members about the estates? That's my question.
Oh, yes.
And were there such discussions also when Dr. Oziel was around?
Yes.
Now, when your cousin Henry told you that you should see Dr. Oziel, did you take that suggestion?
Yes.
And what did you do?
I called up his secretary to get an appointment for the next day.
And did you talk to Dr. Oziel before you saw him, or only to his secretary?
I didn't talk to Dr. Oziel before I saw him.
You only talked to the secretary?
Yes.
Now, what was your reason for going to see Dr. Oziel in October of 1989?
Because I was afraid I was going to kill myself.
And that was based on how you were feeling?
was based on how I was feeling, yeah, obviously, and the dreams that I was having and just what I was thinking and so on.
Were these different dreams than the one you've told us about before?
Yes.
And without telling us what the dream was, what was the type of dream?
Just the fact that I killed myself in the dream and how good it felt.
And what?
And how peaceful and good it felt afterwards.
So you were dreaming about suicide.
Yes.
And were you thinking about suicide when you were awake?
Yes.
And were you having any difficulty in dealing with your family?
Yes, I was having a lot of difficulty.
What was that difficulty?
Difficulty was in being around them. Them not knowing and me not being able to tell them, and it just was very hard for me.
Okay. So do you recall, therefore, going to Dr. Oziel's office on October 31st?
Yes.
And do you recall what it was? Well, first of all, do you remember every detail of the conversations you had with him on October 31st?
No, definitely not.
Do you remember every detail of the conversation that you had with him on November 2nd?
No.
Did you take any notes during those sessions?
No.
Did you have any reason to believe on October 31st, when you were with Dr. Oziel, that it would ever matter what was said in those sessions?
No, not really, no.
Now, do you recall what the first topic was generally of your talk with Dr. Oziel on the 31st?
Yes.
And what was it?
It was about why I went to see him, and basically how lost I felt, the weight I had lost, and what I was planning on doing now. And I'd asked him if that was a good idea, to be playing tennis and not going to school. And I told him about how I was feeling, and just about those things.
Well, why were you asking him if it was a good idea, if you should be playing tennis, if you had already decided to play tennis?
I had decided to play tennis, but I didn't know what was a good idea and what was not at that point. And I didn't know if I'd be able to continue playing tennis. I just needed to do something with my life, because for 2 months I was doing nothing, and it was hard for me. And so I was just talking to him about that and other things.
Okay. And at some point, did you leave his office and take a walk with him?
Yes, at some point I asked him to go for a walk.
Now, was that planned in advance?
No.
And had you thought about doing that before you got to his office?
No.
What prompted you to want to take a walk?
Just that I was having trouble telling him about why I was suicidal, since I hadn't told him that I killed my parents. And so he wasn't really getting it. And so I just decided that I needed to tell somebody, and I decided to tell him right then.
Had you decided to tell him before you went to his office?
No.
And so it was while you were trying to explain why you were suicidal that you decided you should tell him?
Yes.
What did you think? Did you think it would help in some way if you told him?
It would help. It would help in some ways, I guess. I really wasn't thinking that clearly. I really wanted him at that point to tell me that I wasn't a bad person, and tell me that I wasn't this horrible, terrible person that I was thinking that I was. And he couldn't do that unless he knew that I killed my parents.
Okay.
So
you left to go on the walk?
Yes.
And during the course of that walk, were you considering telling him?
I was, yes, I was considering telling him.
Why didn't you just tell him right away?
It was too difficult a thing to just tell him. I was afraid to just tell him.
And how long did it take for you to get over being afraid before you told him?
between a half hour and an hour. I'm not sure.
And do you remember what he said generally after you did tell him?
Yes.
And what did he say?
He said that I thought I was going to tell him and that I had no choice but to tell him.
I don't understand. He said you thought?
No. He said that he thought I was going to tell him this and that he had suspected this and that I had no choice but to tell him.
Okay. And did he say anything else about your having told him?
He said that I had no choice and that it was something that I couldn't hold inside of me forever.
And do you know why he was saying those things to you at that time? Had you said anything about?
I was just telling him how guilty I felt and how I was having trouble with all of my relatives and and them not knowing, and how I couldn't have any type of a relationship with anybody. I was just having difficulty.
Okay. Did you regret telling him the minute you did or not?
No.
Okay. Now, after you told him, did you go back to his office?
Yeah, I started talking to him on the way up about now what I was really feeling suicidal about, and I started going into my dreams and really explaining why I was so depressed.
Okay. And so basically you had a new talk about suicide and depression.
We had a new talk, but a more in-depth talk, I guess, or at least I filled him more in why.
Okay. Now, at some point, did Dr. Oziel start to question you about the shooting of your parents?
Yes.
Now, when you were deciding to tell him, you said your purpose was so you could better explain why you were suicidal?
Yes.
While you were deciding to tell him on that walk, had you made up your mind about whether you would tell him the details or anything like that?
No, I really wasn't thinking. I was thinking one step at a time. I wasn't really thinking in advance. I just told him on an instinct that maybe this would be a good idea. And I really wasn't thinking of the consequences, or I wasn't thinking of Lyle. I was just pretty miserable. And so I just decided to tell him.
All right, but were you thinking of telling him the details of the shooting before you told him that you had done it?
No.
So when he started questioning you about the details, was that something that you had prepared to answer?
No.
When he was questioning you about the details, did you tell him some of the details?
Yeah, he asked me how Lyle and I shot our parents.
And did you tell him how?
Yeah.
And did he ask you anything else?
Yeah, he wanted to know what happened after that, and I just basically told him what happened after that.
You
Up
told
until-
him about what happened that night after that? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
So let's not lead the witness. Ask him what he
What
said.
do you mean by you told him what happened after that?
I told him that Lyle and I had walked into the room with 2 shotguns and killed our parents, and
Okay.
that's why I felt so guilty. And I told him about what happened before we went to the police. That we had dropped off the guns. That we had been at the theater. We just
Okay,
told
so
him different things.
my question was, what did you mean by you told him what happened after that? After meaning when?
After my parents died.
Yes, I know, Mr. Menendez, but that night, the next night, that week, that month? What do you mean?
That night.
Okay. And do you remember, did he seem interested in these details?
He seemed very interested in the details. He cut me off when I was talking about my depression and my suicide. He said, "Well, let me just hear what happened," and so I told him what happened.
And did he ask you questions when you were telling him what happened? Informational questions?
Yeah, he was asking a lot of questions.
And after you told him these details, what happened next?
He was still asking a lot of questions. He asked about the guns. He asked about
What did he ask you?
Mulholland Highway.
What did he ask you about the guns?
He asked me, where did we get these guns? He asked me if we had them in the house, where we got them.
And so did you tell him about purchasing the guns?
I told him that we bought them in San Diego.
And do you recall anything else that he asked you at that point, after you had told him the details of that night and told him about buying the guns?
Anything else more than what he had asked me about the details?
Yeah. What did he, do you recall if he asked you anything after you told him?
Yeah, he asked me why it happened.
Did he ask you at any time who knew about it?
Yes.
And when in the sequence did he ask you that?
I think right after. Because I had been talking about the fact that the guns were on Mulholland and that he asked me why the police hadn't arrested us already if Lyle and I personally bought the guns, and so I told him about what I thought the police knew and who knew what and what the situation was.
And did you tell him that before he asked you why?
Yes, I think so.
Was there a discussion about Lyle and Lyle knowing that you were there?
Yes.
And when did that come up?
That may have even come up before I told him about what I thought the police knew. That may have come up even in the middle of me telling him the details of what happened that night.
Well, how did it come up?
He asked me if Lyle knew I was here. And I said no, Lyle didn't know I was here, and I wasn't sure how I was going to tell Lyle that I told him. Now that I did tell him. I hadn't thought about it, and so I hadn't thought about telling him. And so he said, well, how are you going to tell Lyle? And he just kept grilling me about what I was going to tell Lyle, how I was going to tell Lyle, when I was going to tell Lyle. And I said, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't. And he said, no, definitely you should.
Now, before he started grilling you about Lyle and when and how and why you should tell him, had it even crossed your mind in the recitation? You even thought about Lyle? And
No.
had it even occurred to you that you might want to tell him that you had told Dr. Oziel or might not want to tell him?
No, as soon as I told him that Lyle and I did this, I didn't think about any of those things.
Okay.
I wasn't.
So would it be fair to say Dr. Oziel seemed concerned about Lyle?
Oh, yes.
Overall,
Yes, he wanted to. He didn't want me to just go and tell Lyle.
Well, had you even planned to do that?
I hadn't even thought about it. And as he was asking me, I was trying to think. And so I just said what the best I could think of what I might do.
Okay. So when this came up, when Dr. Oziel brought this up and after this discussion, did he decide to do something?
Yes, he wanted to call Lyle right away, and that's what he did. He got on the phone and called Lyle.
And, okay, and after he called Lyle, did he tell you something about Lyle?
He told me that Lyle was coming over.
Okay. And at that point, when he told you that Lyle was coming over, right after that, do you recall what the conversation was that you had with Dr. Oziel?
I said, I don't remember exactly where in the conversation he called Lyle. I think he called him right as I was finished telling him the details, or right when I was telling him about what the police knew.
Which happened first, Mr. Menendez? Did you tell him about the details and then answer his questions about what did the police know?
Yes.
Okay. And
so it may have been that he called Lyle after all of that. I'm not exactly sure.
all right, did all of that come before his asking you why or after?
He first asked me about the details, and then he asked me why.
Did he first ask you what does the police know?
Yes.
Okay, so that did all come before he asked you why.
Yeah, I'm quite sure about that.
Now, when he asked you why, what was your reaction to that question?
I wasn't expecting that question.
Why not?
I don't know. I mean, I hadn't even thought about telling him. I hadn't thought about what I was going to say. And it just shook me that he asked me why. So I just told him what I told him.
Well, let me ask you this. At that point, when he asked you why, was it your understanding that your brother was on his way over?
Yes, I knew Lyle was on his way over.
And how long ordinarily would it have taken for someone to get from your house on Elm Drive to Dr. Oziel's office on Bedford Drive?
It ordinarily would have taken 5 minutes. He took a little longer. I started to stall and wait for him, but it just kept dragging on. He didn't come right away.
When Dr. Oziel asked you why, did you tell him?
No, I told him I didn't know.
And why did you tell him you didn't know?
Because I didn't know how to respond. He was very forceful. He was very aggressive, and he was very interested in the details and everything about it. And that's not why I was there to talk to him.
You were there to try to what?
I was there to try to feel better and talk about how not to kill myself. And that's not what he wanted to talk about.
So when you told him you didn't know why, what did he start saying?
He asked me, I think he asked me when we started talking about it. He asked me something about when the idea came up or when it first occurred to Lyle and I or something like that.
Okay. And do you recall what you said to him?
Yeah.
And what did you say?
I said that Lyle and I had had conversations that week.
And that was true, wasn't it? You had had conversations that week with your brother.
Yes.
And did you tell him the nature of the conversations that you had with your brother that week?
I told him part of the nature of the conversations. I was just really playing it by ear. I was just trying to go from one sentence to the next, not knowing what I was going to say.
Was there some reason why you didn't want to tell him the truth?
Yes.
What?
I absolutely was not wanting to tell him about the sex between Dad and I.
Why?
Because I just didn't want to discuss it with him.
Did you want to discuss it with anybody?
No, I wanted to get it away. I was having a lot of flashbacks. I was having a lot of problems dealing with it even after, and I just didn't. I wanted to get away from it.
Now, during the conversations that you actually did have with your brother that week before the shooting, I think you've already told us there were conversations about how the family was not close and how you wanted to be close to Lyle. Is that right?
We had those conversations that week, but I didn't understand the question.
Okay. I was just asking you, did you have those conversations?
Yes.
And did you tell Dr. Oziel about that? That
Yes.
You talked with your brother about the family not being close?
Yes, I told him about all of those things about the family. A lot of the conversation that I had with Lyle on Tuesday.
Now, let me ask you this, Mr. Menendez. Did Dr. Oziel know your parents?
Yes, he knew them very well.
To the best of your knowledge, had he met with them several times?
Yes.
And during the time that you were talking to him, was he expressing himself? Was he describing them to you?
Objection, leaving.
Rephrase the question.
I have to think.
All right. It's a very vague question.
Okay.
Ask
During the
something else.
time that you were talking to Dr. Oziel on October 31st, was he telling you his opinion of your parents' personalities?
Objection, leaving.
It's the same.
Was he talking about your parents?
Yes.
And in what way was he talking about your parents?
He was telling me about my father and why I probably did this. And
When you say he was telling you about your father, what kinds of things was he? I don't mean to quote him, but
he was telling me that my father was an extraordinarily controlling person. I think he used the word dominating. And basically he was saying that Dad was pretty ferocious and aggressive. And he was saying that nobody could live under those circumstances. And that's probably why I had my confusion.
Did he seem to know your father in the way he described it?
Yes.
And was he putting together characteristics of him?
Yes, characteristics. You'd be right.
Now, when he would say
More than characteristics, I would say he was putting together what he felt my dad was.
the kind of person he felt your dad
Yes.
was.
Objection, ladies.
Overruled.
And what was your response when he would say these things?
I would agree. At this point, I was waiting for Lyle to come, and I was just letting the conversation flow.
Now, you've heard Dr. Oziel in court, Mr. Menendez. Did he talk a great deal during this session of October 31st, or was he just quiet and listening
No, Dr. Oziel tended to talk
in that session?
a lot in that session, and
What about in the next session on November 2nd? Did he tend to talk a lot in that session as well?
yeah, even more at that point. But I wanted him to talk. I wanted him to keep talking because at that point, I had to think of reasons about why I was going to tell Lyle I told Dr. Oziel.
So you were somewhat distracted at that point?
Objection, ladies.
Sustained.
What do you mean you had to think?
Not distracted. I was very concerned that Lyle was coming over. I wanted Lyle to come over, but I was also concerned that Lyle was coming over because I knew that I had really betrayed my brother's trust, and I was thinking about Lyle's going to be angry with me, and he had a right to be, and I just was thinking real quickly before I got there, because I thought he'd be there any minute, about what I was going to tell Lyle, and how I was going to explain to him that I told Dr. Oziel.
Okay. And did Lyle get there?
Yes.
All right, we're going to have to take a recess. I indicated that one of the jurors has to leave at 4:20, and we're almost there. So we'll take a recess until tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Again, reminder not to discuss this case among yourselves with anyone else. Don't form any opinions about it, and we'll resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock. I'll ask that council remain for a moment. All right, just one matter. Mr. Burt, or counsel for both defendants, indicated that they would have some briefs or cases or whatever for the court to review in regards to the attorney-client privilege issue.
There are some cases that I will provide to the court at this point on two issues. One is the 1016 issues, and the three cases that I'm citing to the court are the issue when a mental condition is tendered, who's tendering it, and the cases are self-explanatory.
These are in addition to those that you cited in the brief that you previously filed.
Correct. And then the other three cases are on the attorney-client issue, and specifically on the dual purpose test that the prosecution cites to the court. And then there's one out-of-state case that I'm providing a copy to the court because it's very close to the facts in this case.
Okay, you can provide all that to the clerk and to the district attorney as well, obviously. Okay. All right, we'll be in recess till tomorrow at 9.